Hey everyone, I'm curious. Where are you all tuning in from? It would be great to hear a bit about the different places our community is connecting from around the world. Share where you're watching from and maybe a fun fact about your local area. I'm always excited to learn more about the amazing people who support us. Can't wait to hear your stories. Best regards. I arrived at my secluded cabin nestled deep in the dense woods of Oregon, blissfully unaware of the chilling events that were about to unfold. Everett O'Malley is the name I've carried through life, and on this particular weekend, I sought to escape the incessant bustle of city living after an exhausting work week. This cabin, a family heirloom passed down through generations, had always been a cherished piece of my identity. As I breathed in the lush, verdant surroundings, I began the familiar ritual of unpacking my belongings and preparing for what I anticipated would be a few tranquil days of relaxation. The woods had long been my sanctuary, a place where I could unwind and reconnect with the serenity of nature. However, as daylight began to wane, an unusual sound caught my attention, a noise I had never encountered in all my years of visiting this cabin. Curiosity piqued, I grabbed my trusty flashlight and ventured out to investigate the unfamiliar disturbance. Several yards from the cabin, I stumbled upon a group of people gathered around a flickering campfire. Among them were two men I had never met before, Tal Shire and Brecken Nygaard. Call it intuition, but I knew instantly that this group wasn't merely a collection of lost campers. Tal shared some disturbing news about several missing people in the region, and he firmly believed they had fallen victim to an enigmatic creature said to roam these very woods. This was news to me, but Tal insisted on the validity of his claims. Initially, I found it difficult to take him seriously. However, as Tal began to recount his own chilling experiences, a seed of doubt took root in my mind, and I started questioning the safety of these woods that had long been my personal retreat. Yet something deep inside whispered not to abandon logic so easily for tales of strange creatures lurking in the darkness. The group expressed hesitation about calling for help, fearing they might lose valuable time or draw unwanted attention to themselves. It became apparent that not everyone had stumbled upon these woods with innocent intentions. As night crept deeper around us, the tension grew taut, like a violin string stretched to the point of snapping. Jokes were cracked here and there, perhaps an effort by some to alleviate their frayed nerves. While conversing with Brecken about our dismal situation, I spoke of my mundane city life as a freelance writer and the comfort I found in these unparalleled moments of tranquility. Brecken seemed to sympathize with my desire for solitude, and for a moment, a sense of understanding passed between us. Little did I know that this brief moment of connection would be overshadowed by the terrifying events that were about to transpire. The woods, once my trusted companion, were about to reveal a darker, more sinister side, one that would forever change the course of my life and the lives of those around me. The next morning, I awoke to a spine-chilling scream echoing through the woods. Rushing from the cabin, I found the campsite in disarray. One of the group members was missing, and chaos seemed ready to erupt at any moment. When we began searching for our lost companion, Tal ominously warned us that this could be the work of that mysterious creature he had spoken of the night before. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as we scoured the woods, desperately seeking any sign of our missing friend. During our search, we managed to discern some deeply unsettling tracks. The savage footprints looked to belong to no recognizable animal, fueling even more fear amongst us. Surely, whatever this creature was, it wouldn't spare anything in its path. As dread tinged our resolve, we pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. Our worst fears were realized when we came upon a gruesome scene, the lifeless body of our missing acquaintance. The carnage that lay before us defied human comprehension. It was as if a monstrous beast had torn their body apart with such raw savagery that it challenged all rationale. Even though this harrowing sight sickened me and strangled me with terror, I couldn't help but notice an odd pattern upon further inspection. Whatever creature had done this had left evidence pointing towards a distinct intelligence, one that perhaps matched our own. Tal's assertion started weighing more heavily in my mind, and reality suddenly felt distorted and nightmarish. My sanctuary had warped into a living horror, and calling for help no longer seemed outlandish or excessive. We moved quickly back to the cabin, scrambling for our phones, only to find there was no signal reception. The panic that had been bubbling like molasses now spilled over, impacting each one of us differently. Some fell silent and withdrawn, while others frayed at the edges, their composure unraveling with each passing moment. Suddenly the sky painted itself with an eerie shade of twilight, and the woods wore a foreboding air of tension. It was clear that we were about to face the monstrous entity responsible for this abomination, yet naming it remained elusive. With no other means of communication, we decided to split up and head in different directions. Some ventured out to higher ground in hopes of finding a signal, while others searched for help. Our mutual worry was evident, but I knew this decision would grant us a higher possibility of survival. Little did I know that this choice would lead me down a path of unimaginable terror and guilt that would forever haunt my consciousness. I chose to partner with Sarah and headed down the path that led away from the cabin. We walked cautiously as I noticed her scrutinizing the ground for any indication of the creature that had altered our world. Our conversation consisted mostly of Sarah theorizing about where this beast could have originated, but I refrained from participating due to my lack of knowledge regarding myths or folklore. Our search led us to a rocky clearing overlooking a large ravine. As we stood near the edge, my eyes scanned below and locked onto something disturbingly out of place, bloody fur and remnants of bones strewn about. Before I could bring this gruesome finding to Sarah's attention, she gasped. A massive creature emerged out of nowhere, bearing long, dagger-like claws and an unnerving, elongated snout filled with sharp teeth stained with fresh blood. It stood on hind legs, towering over us, and displaying striking dark eyes that bored into our souls. Fear paralyzed me as the monster slowly moved closer, growling menacingly before lunging at Sarah. In that moment, all rational thought and selfless bravery abandoned me. Instead of assisting Sarah, I sprinted back toward the cabin, leaving her to fend off the terrifying attacker alone. Guilt and shame consumed me as I ran, but the primal instinct for self-preservation had taken control, overriding any sense of loyalty or heroism. I finally reached the cabin, only to find it empty, with no signs of my friends who had ventured out for help. Collapsing against the wall, I struggled to catch my breath while cursing myself for abandoning Sarah and fleeing when she needed me most. The weight of my actions bore down upon me, suffocating me with the realization of my own cowardice. Before I could dwell further on my shameful behavior, an agonizing scream echoed through the woods, a sound I recognized as Sarah's. The reality of her impending demise cemented my guilt, but like the others, I couldn't muster the courage to confront the creature that orchestrated this nightmare. For what felt like a lifetime, I remained inside the cabin, cursing my cowardice and praying my friends were still alive. After what seemed like an eternity, the sound of familiar footsteps approached. The cabin door creaked open as Tal, Luke, and a few others entered, their faces wearing visible exhaustion and hopelessness. "This thing, it got Sarah," I croaked out between shuddered breaths. Guilt-ridden glances were exchanged among us before we shared the stories of our prior searches. Much to our dismay, none had found help or phone signal reception. We felt trapped and defeated, uncertain about our chances against this monstrous predator that seemed to possess an intellect well beyond human comprehension. We decided we couldn't stay alone any longer, fearing another attack could occur at any moment. Upon leaving the cabin in a single formation, with only each other as protection against such an unpredictable menace, we spotted something at the edge of the clearing. There stood the menacing creature, staring eerily from afar as a sickly grin spread across its long snout. We hastily huddled closer together in terror. It appeared to watch us for a moment before slowly turning away and vanishing into the forest. After it disappeared out of sight, a sense of dread washed over us. The realization that our worst fear was literally lurking just out of reach left us feeling utterly helpless and at its mercy. We knew we had to find a way out of these woods, but the thought of navigating through the dense foliage with this creature on the loose filled us with a paralyzing sense of dread. As we discussed our options, it became clear that we had no choice but to stick together and make our way back to civilization. We gathered what supplies we could from the cabin and set out on a treacherous journey, our senses heightened and our nerves frayed. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent our hearts racing, and we found ourselves jumping at shadows, constantly looking over our shoulders for any sign of the creature. The hours stretched on as we trekked through the woods, our progress slow and arduous. We took turns keeping watch, never allowing ourselves a moment of complete rest. The knowledge that the creature could be watching us, biding its time before striking again, weighed heavily on our minds. The once peaceful and serene forest had transformed into a labyrinth of terror, and we were desperate to find our way out. As days turned into weeks since our horrifying encounter with this elusive beast, we managed to avoid engaging with it or even learning its true origin. Eventually, circumstances permitted us to communicate with civilization and seek assistance in evacuating from our once beloved sanctuary that had turned into an unimaginable horror. Reminiscing about it now leaves a sickening pain deep within my heart. It's not just the loss of our beloved friend Sarah, though that still stings. It's the chilling fact that something so monstrous and intelligent stalked us in those woods. The gnawing terror of wondering if one day it might resurface remains a constant reminder of our frailty and the brutal reality that nothing can truly prepare someone for an ordeal as gruesome and life-changing as this. In the aftermath of our escape, we were left to pick up the pieces of our shattered lives. The authorities searched the woods extensively, but no trace of the creature was ever found. Some speculated that it had moved on to new hunting grounds, while others believed it had never existed at all, chalking up our experience to some sort of shared delusion brought on by fear and isolation. But I know the truth. I saw it with my own eyes, felt its presence in the very marrow of my bones. And though I may never fully come to terms with the guilt I carry for abandoning Sarah in her moment of need, I have vowed to never let her memory fade. I've since returned to the city, trying to rebuild some semblance of a normal life, but the scars of that fateful weekend will forever remain etched upon my soul. The cabin, once a cherished refuge, now stands as a haunting reminder of the horrors we faced. I know I will never set foot in those woods again, for fear of awakening the beast that lurks within. As I sit here putting pen to paper and reliving the nightmare that forever changed the course of my life, I can only hope that by sharing my story, others may be spared the same fate. For while the creature may have vanished from sight, I know it is still out there, waiting, watching, ready to strike again at a moment's notice. And so I offer this warning to anyone who dares to venture into those woods. Tread carefully, for you never know what horrors may be lurking in the shadows, ready to consume you whole. The wilderness is a cruel and unforgiving mistress, and once she has you in her grasp, she may never let you go. I woke up one morning with a splitting headache, wondering when I became friends with pain. A sarcastic thought to start the day, but what could you expect from a recovering journalist turned wannabe writer? My name's Huxley Wainwright, and after a string of disappointing years in print journalism, I decided to head out to Hollister Hills, a heavily wooded area in Northern California. I rented a modest cabin near the serene Fresnel Creek to gather my thoughts and attempt my first novel. The rustic abode boasted practical furnishings, a simple bed, sturdy wooden table, and humble fireplace. Throwing open the windows in hope of some fresh air, I was met with the earthy scent of damp forest soil mingling with the crisp aroma of pine needles. On my first day exploring the area, I encountered Cato, a local hunter who lived in a cabin deeper in the woods. He was an enigmatic man in his 40s, with long dark hair peppered with gray and a laid-back, almost nirvanic demeanor. "You got any tips for snaring rabbits?" Cato joked one day as I was chopping firewood outside my cabin. "Can't say I do," I smiled back. "I'm here trying to write a book." Cato raised his eyebrows, intrigued. "Well then, best of luck to you," he said with a nod. Over the following weeks, a friendship formed through our brief visits and shared stories. I told Cato about my years as an investigative journalist, like that time back in Minneapolis when my pen almost became my weapon against the mayor's corruption. In turn, he regaled me with tales of his adventures stalking game through the dense California woodland. One foggy morning, Cato appeared at my doorstep looking more agitated than usual. He spoke of something deeply unsettling he had found while hunting near the creek, the completely mangled carcasses of rabbits and foxes. Clearly distressed, he swatted away strands of his dark hair and sighed deeply. "I don't know what happened to them, but it was intense," he said gravely. "I don't own any firearms," I told him with concern. "Any idea who we should call about this?" "Honestly, everyone hunts out here," Cato said reluctantly, scratching his stubble. "They might think we're just a pair of conspiracy nuts. Let's leave it for now and keep our eyes open." So we carried on with our lives, but an uneasy feeling began to fester in the pit of my stomach. Little did I know the true horror was only beginning to reveal itself in those misty hills. The scourge that lurked in the shadowy timberland would soon draw us into a nightmare beyond our darkest imagination. A few nights later, my restless sleep was shattered by the agonized screams of wild animals piercing the night. The eerie, discordant symphony sent chills down my spine and compelled me to venture out into the moonlit forest to investigate. Cold sweat beaded on my brow as I grabbed a flashlight with trembling hands. I crept out of my cabin and nearly jumped out of my skin when a dark figure emerged from the shadows. To my relief, it was Cato, his normally calm face etched with concern. He had his trusty shotgun slung over his shoulder. "Did you hear that ungodly racket?" I asked in a hushed whisper, my heart still pounding. Cato nodded grimly. "Don't know what it could be, but it ain't right. Let's go find out." With trepidation, we made our way into the foreboding woods, our path illuminated only by the narrow beam of my flashlight and the pale moonlight filtering through the dense canopy. Gnarled tree branches seemed to reach out like skeletal hands, and every rustle of leaves made us flinch. Entering the forest after midnight was like stepping into an alien world where the familiar became strange and menacing. Shadows loomed larger, distorted into monstrous shapes, and the oppressive darkness threatened to swallow us whole. We crept toward the creek, our ears straining for any unnatural sound in the eerie stillness. As we neared the spot where Cato had first discovered the mangled animal remains, a pungent metallic odor assaulted our nostrils. My stomach lurched as the flashlight revealed a horrific sight. The mutilated carcass of a stag, its body torn open and flesh strewn about like macabre confetti. Bile rising in my throat, I forced myself to examine the gruesome scene. The stag looked like it had been attacked by a creature of unimaginable ferocity, with jagged gashes and teeth marks that belonged to no animal I recognized. As we stood there trying to make sense of the grisly puzzle, a sudden, ear-shattering screech cut through the night like a blade, freezing the blood in our veins. Our faces drained of color, and we exchanged a look of pure terror. In that moment we knew with chilling certainty that whatever ungodly thing was responsible for this savagery was still out there, lurking in the shadows, and it was very much aware of our presence. We turned to flee back to the relative safety of the cabins, but our legs felt like lead, weighed down by primal fear. Suddenly, the undergrowth exploded in a fury of snapping branches and rustling leaves, and an enormous wolf-like monstrosity burst into view, its baleful eyes glowing like embers and saliva dripping from its glistening fangs. Without a second thought, I shoved Cato behind the thick trunk of an ancient oak, hoping it would provide some meager shelter from the creature's ravenous gaze. We pressed our backs against the rough bark, chests heaving as we fought to control our ragged breathing. With trembling hands, Cato raised his shotgun, his knuckles white as he gripped the stock. I clutched my flashlight like a talisman, my mind reeling as I tried to process the mind-bending horror before us. The beast was a hulking mass of rippling muscle and matted ink-black fur, its powerful frame dwarfing any natural wolf. Its muzzle was stained with the blood of its victims, and its malevolent eyes burned with a feral, otherworldly intelligence that sent icy tendrils of fear down my spine. Peering around the trunk with held breath, we watched the creature sniffing the air, its grotesque snout twitching as it sought our scent. It paced back and forth, its massive paws leaving deep impressions in the loamy soil, claws glinting in the moonlight. My mind raced, flashing back to hushed conversations I'd overheard among the town's old-timers, whispered legends of an ancient evil that stalked the hills, a demonic presence that had haunted the region since time immemorial. Could this nightmare-made flesh be the manifestation of those chilling tales? "We need backup," I whispered urgently to Cato, my voice barely audible over the thundering of my heart. "We can't fight this thing alone." Cato nodded, his jaw clenched tight. With slow, deliberate movements, he extracted his cell phone from his pocket and dialed a number, never taking his eyes off the beast. "Tony," he breathed into the phone, his voice strained. "We've got a serious situation here. There's some kind of monster out by the creek. We need you and the boys, and bring all the firepower you've got. Hurry." As Cato ended the call, an oppressive silence descended upon the forest. The creature had gone still, its head cocked as if listening intently. A sense of dread crawled up my spine as I realized it might have heard our desperate plea for help. Time seemed to warp and stretch in the creature's malevolent presence, seconds bleeding into minutes that felt like an eternity. Just as the tension became unbearable, the distant rumble of engines shattered the silence, growing louder with each passing heartbeat. Help had arrived, but would it be enough to confront the primal horror that held us in its terrifying thrall? As headlights pierced the gloom and car doors slammed in the distance, the beast swung its massive head towards the new threat, a low guttural growl emanating from its blood-stained maw. The creature's baleful gaze snapped back to us as Tony and his men emerged from the trees, rifles at the ready. For a heart-stopping moment I was certain it would lunge, its powerful jaws seeking our vulnerable flesh. But then the night erupted with the deafening roar of gunfire as our rescuers opened up on the beast, the muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. The creature let out an unearthly shriek of rage and pain as the bullets found their mark, its thick hide shuddering under the onslaught. But to our horror, it didn't go down. Instead, it whirled to face its attackers with terrifying speed, its eyes blazing with unholy fury. Before any of us could react, the beast charged, its massive bulk hurtling towards Tony's group like a juggernaut. I heard a scream cut short as the creature slammed into one of the men, its terrible jaws clamping down on his throat in a spray of crimson. Panic seized me as the horrific scene unfolded, my mind screaming at me to run, to flee this waking nightmare. But my legs remained frozen, my body refusing to obey as I watched the creature savaging the man, his blood staining the earth black in the moonlight. Beside me, Cato seemed similarly paralyzed, his eyes wide with disbelief and terror. But then a yell from Tony jolted us back to reality. "Run, damn it!" he bellowed, his rifle barking as he tried to draw the beast's attention away from his fallen comrade. "Get to the cabin." That was all the prompting we needed. Cato and I broke from our stupor, our feet pounding the forest floor as we sprinted towards the cabin with every ounce of speed we could muster. Behind us, the sounds of battle raged on. The roar of gunfire, the snarls of the beast, and the cries of men fighting for their lives. We burst through the cabin door, slamming it shut behind us and frantically throwing the bolt. Gasping for air, we slumped against the wall, our hearts hammering in our chests as we strained to listen to the chaos outside. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness, each second an eternity of dread. Gradually, the clamor of combat began to fade, replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence that seemed to press down upon us like a smothering weight. Then, without warning, a series of heavy, deliberate thuds shook the cabin door, each impact sending a jolt of terror through my exhausted body. The beast had found us, and it was determined to have its prey. I exchanged a haunted look with Cato, the same sickening realization etched on both our faces. This was it. Our last stand against a living nightmare that defied all reason and sanity. With grim resolve, we braced ourselves for the final confrontation, knowing that no matter the outcome, our lives would never be the same. Just as I was certain the door would splinter under the relentless assault, the pounding abruptly ceased. For a moment, the only sound was the ragged sawing of our breathing and the thunder of our racing hearts. Then a voice called out from beyond the threshold, "Huxley? Cato, you boys still breathing in there?" It was Tony, his normally gruff voice strained and weary. Relief flooded through me, so intense it was almost painful. I staggered to the door and threw it open to reveal Tony and his last remaining man, their clothes torn and bloody, their faces haggard and haunted. But they were alive. Behind them, sprawled on the forest floor like a grotesque trophy, lay the corpse of the beast, its once terrifying form now still and lifeless. The men had managed to bring the creature down, but the price had been steep. The fallen hunter, Tony's friend, lay nearby, his sightless eyes staring up at the starry sky. We gathered in the cabin, nursing our wounds, both physical and emotional. There would be a time for mourning, for grappling with the enormity of what we had faced. But for now, we simply clung to the solace of each other's presence, bound together by the unspeakable horror we had survived. In the days that followed, word of the incident spread through the small town like wildfire, sparking whispers of ancient legends and dark forces stirring in the hills. Some spoke of similar beasts sighted in the deep woods, while others dismissed it all as campfire tales and overactive imaginations. But for those of us who bore witness to the nightmare, there was no doubt. The evil that lurked in the shadows of Hollister Hills was real, and it had left an indelible mark on our souls. As I tried to settle back into the rhythm of my life at the cabin, I found that the once peaceful solitude now felt oppressive, the forest's beauty tainted by the memory of the horror that dwelled within. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing, phantom images of the beast lurking just out of sight. Sleep became an elusive specter, my dreams haunted by visions of glowing eyes and blood-stained fangs. The unfinished pages of my novel lay scattered across my desk, the words now seeming hollow and insignificant in the face of the primal truths I had encountered. But even as the darkness threatened to consume me, I found strength in the bonds I had forged with Cato and the others who had faced the beast alongside me. In our shared trauma, we discovered a resilience and determination that could not be broken. Together, we began to piece together the fragmented lore and whispered secrets that hinted at the true nature of the creature and the ancient curse that had given rise to its existence. It was a quest that would lead us deeper into the heart of the mystery, testing our courage and resolve at every turn. And though the specter of the beast would forever haunt the corners of our minds, we knew that we could no longer turn a blind eye to the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of our world. For in confronting the nightmare, we had awakened to a higher purpose, to stand as guardians against the evil that threatened to consume the unsuspecting. As I looked out over the misty hills that had become my unexpected crucible, I knew that my life had been irrevocably changed. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and the unknown, but armed with the strength of our fellowship and the hard-won wisdom born of our ordeal, I felt a flicker of hope amidst the shadows. The beast of Hollister Hills may have been vanquished, but our battle against the darkness was only just beginning. And though the road would be long and the trials many, I knew that we would face them together, united by the unbreakable bonds forged in the flames of shared adversity. For in the end, it is not the monsters without that define us, but the courage and compassion we carry within. And it is in that light that we find the strength to push back against the encroaching shadows, to stand as beacons of hope in a world too often consumed by fear. So let the darkness come. We will be ready, for we have stared into the abyss and emerged changed, but unbroken. The hunt is over, but the true journey has only just begun. Felton Raleigh's life had taken a turn for the worse. After a brutal divorce and losing his job at the law firm where he had poured his heart and soul into for the past decade, Felton found himself needing an escape from the suffocating grip of the city. He packed his bags and set off for his family's old cabin in the dense woodlands of Moreland, Georgia, hoping to find solace and a chance to figure out his next steps in life. As he navigated the winding roads leading to the cabin, Felton couldn't help but marvel at the serenity that enveloped him. The lush green foliage seemed to stretch on for miles, broken only by the occasional chirping of birds and the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. It was a stark contrast to the constant cacophony of car horns and bustling crowds he had grown accustomed to in the city. The cabin itself was a modest structure, nestled amidst a sprawling 77 acres of untamed wilderness. As Felton stepped out of his car and walked towards the front door, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. Here, in the heart of nature, he could finally breathe and escape the troubles that had been weighing him down. Settling into the cabin, Felton decided to take a walk and explore his new surroundings. The sun was beginning to set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the leaf-strewn ground. The crunch of leaves beneath his feet created an almost alien rhythm, so different from the concrete jungle he had left behind. As the days passed, Felton found himself falling into a quiet routine. He would wake up early, make himself a simple breakfast, and then spend hours wandering through the woods, taking in the beauty of the untouched landscape. However, as he ventured deeper into the forest, an unsettling feeling began to creep over him. At first, Felton dismissed it as a product of his own mind, a result of the solitude and the unfamiliar surroundings. But as the days turned into weeks, the uneasiness only grew stronger. It was as if the very trees were watching him, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, ready to ensnare him in their grasp. In an effort to ward off the eerie sensations, Felton turned to a newfound hobby, woodworking. He had discovered a set of tools in one of the cabin's storage areas and decided to put them to use. The act of shaping and molding the wood provided a much-needed focus, a way to keep his mind occupied and his hands busy. But even as he lost himself in his craft, Felton couldn't shake the growing sense of dread that had taken root in his heart. And then one day, he realized something that sent a chill down his spine. The birds had stopped singing. The silence that had settled over the woods was deafening. Felton had grown accustomed to the constant chirping and tweeting of the birds, their melodies a soothing backdrop to his daily routines. But now, as he stepped outside the cabin, he was greeted by an eerie stillness that seemed to permeate every inch of the forest. It was around this time that Ephraim Dansby, a local ranger, stopped by to check on Felton. Ephraim explained that it was customary for him to visit the isolated cabins in the area, just to make sure everything was all right and to offer assistance if needed. As they talked, Ephraim's face grew serious. He warned Felton about recent reports of grizzly bear attacks in the nearby woods and urged him to be cautious when venturing out. Felton nodded, grateful for the ranger's concern, and the two exchanged phone numbers before Ephraim took his leave. Despite the warning, Felton found himself drawn to the woods, his curiosity piqued by the strange silence that had fallen over the area. One evening, as he sat on the cabin's porch, working on his latest woodworking project, a loud crashing noise echoed from beyond the tree line. Felton's heart raced as he realized that the sound was much closer than any wildlife should have been. A mix of fear and curiosity gripped him, and he hesitated for a moment before grabbing a flashlight and cautiously approaching the source of the noise. As he stepped into the woods, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the gathering darkness, Felton's breath caught in his throat. There, standing before him, was a massive, fur-covered creature, its form stooped and twisted, towering over 10 feet tall. The creature's face was a grotesque amalgamation of animalistic features, its eyes glinting with a feral intelligence as it spotted Felton. In that moment, Felton knew he needed to run, to get as far away from this monstrosity as possible. But his legs refused to obey, frozen in place by the sheer horror of what he was witnessing. The creature took a step forward, its movements unnaturally fluid for its size. Felton's mind screamed at him to move, to flee, but it was as if he was paralyzed, unable to process the reality of the situation. Just as the creature was about to lunge, a sudden rustling in the underbrush broke the spell. Felton's legs finally responded, and he turned and ran, his heart pounding in his ears as he raced back to the cabin. He slammed the door behind him, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the lock. That night, as he lay in bed, Felton's mind raced with the implications of what he had seen. He knew that he needed help, that he couldn't face this nightmare alone. With trembling fingers, he reached for his phone and dialed Ephraim's number. The next day, Ephraim arrived at the cabin, his face etched with concern as he listened to Felton's frantic retelling of the previous night's events. Felton struggled to convey the fear that still gripped him, his words tumbling out in a jumbled mess as he described the creature that had nearly attacked him. Ephraim listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. When Felton finished, the ranger took a deep breath and began to speak. "The locals have a name for it," he said, his voice low and somber. "They call it the Woodland Strangler." Felton's blood ran cold at the name, his mind immediately conjuring images of the twisted, fur-covered monstrosity that had confronted him in the woods. Ephraim continued, explaining that every few years, odd disappearances were reported in the area, and that some folks believed it was the doing of the creature Felton had encountered. The ranger's words did little to settle Felton's nerves, and when Ephraim left later that afternoon, he pressed a revolver into Felton's hands, along with some simple instructions on how to use it. "Just in case," he said, his eyes grave. As the days passed, Felton found himself consumed by thoughts of the woodland strangler. He knew that the smart thing to do would be to leave, to pack his bags and put as much distance between himself and the creature as possible. But something deep inside him, a strange compulsion he couldn't quite understand, urged him to stay and confront the beast. Maybe it was the need for a life-altering event, a way to break free from the monotony that had consumed him since his divorce and job loss. Or perhaps it was a desire to understand that which defied logic, to unravel the mystery of the creature that lurked in the shadows of the forest. Whatever the reason, Felton found himself preparing for another confrontation. He spent hours practicing with the revolver, honing his aim and familiarizing himself with the weight of the weapon in his hand. He studied the woods around the cabin, marking trails and possible escape routes in case things took a turn for the worse. And then, one night, as the moon hung heavy in the sky, Felton heard the familiar crashing noises once again. His heart raced as he grabbed the revolver and his flashlight, steeling himself for what was to come. With a deep breath, Felton stepped out into the night, determined to face the woodland strangler head-on. The flashlight in one hand and the revolver in the other, he moved slowly towards the source of the sound, his senses heightened and his mind focused on the task at hand, survival. As Felton ventured deeper into the woods, the crashing noises intensified, guiding him towards the spot where he had first encountered the creature. His heart pounded in his chest, and a foul, musty smell permeated the air, a sure sign that the woodland strangler was near. And there it was, crouched among the thick foliage, its beady black eyes glaring at Felton with a predatory intensity. The creature's body was covered in matted fur, its long limbs resembling gnarled branches. As it stood to its full height, Felton couldn't help but marvel at the sheer size of the beast, its form towering over him like a twisted nightmare come to life. The creature took a step forward, revealing a maw filled with jagged, razor-sharp teeth. Felton's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the nature of the monstrosity before him. Was it some kind of long-lost species, a relic from a time when monsters roamed the earth? Or was it something else entirely, a manifestation of the darkest corners of the human psyche? There was no time to ponder such questions, as the woodland strangler regarded Felton with a hungry gaze, its body tensing in anticipation of the hunt. Felton raised his revolver, his hands trembling from a potent mix of fear and adrenaline. He knew that his chances of defeating such a beast were slim, but the weight of the weapon in his hand provided a small measure of comfort, a tangible reminder that he was not entirely helpless. With a guttural snort, the creature charged, its monstrous form crashing through the underbrush with a speed and agility that defied its size. Felton fired a shot in panic, the bullet whizzing past the creature's head by mere inches. The woodland strangler closed the distance between them in a matter of seconds, its massive limb lashing out and catching Felton across the forearm. Pain exploded through Felton's body as the creature's claws tore through his flesh, and the force of the blow sent him sprawling to the ground. He struggled to maintain his grip on the flashlight and revolver, knowing that they were his only lifelines in this nightmarish confrontation. Desperate, Felton fired 2 more shots as the creature loomed over him, ready to strike again. One bullet found its mark, burying itself in the beast's shoulder, while the other zipped harmlessly into the night. The woodland strangler let out an ear-piercing wail, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the forest, but it did not retreat. As the creature prepared to lunge once more, Felton's mind raced, searching for any possible means of escape. And then, as if in answer to his silent prayers, a pair of headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the twisted silhouette of the woodland strangler against the trees. The sudden appearance of the vehicle seemed to give the creature pause, its attention momentarily diverted by the blinding light. Seizing the opportunity, Felton pushed himself up from the ground, ignoring the searing pain in his arm as he ran, his heart pounding in his ears as he raced towards the safety of the cabin. Felton burst through the cabin door, slamming it shut behind him as he collapsed to the floor, his injured arm cradled against his chest. Outside he could hear the sound of the vehicle's engine, followed by the unmistakable crack of a gunshot. Moments later there was a knock at the door, and Felton's heart leapt into his throat. Cautiously he approached the entrance, his revolver at the ready. But when he opened the door, he was greeted not by the twisted visage of the woodland strangler, but by the concerned face of Ephraim Dansby. The ranger had returned, driven by a nagging sense that something terrible was about to unfold. He had arrived just in time to see Felton fleeing from the creature, and had managed to fire off a shot of his own, driving the beast back into the depths of the forest. As Felton recounted his harrowing encounter, the reality of the situation began to sink in. He was in shock, his mind reeling from the horror he had witnessed. The thought of calling the authorities or seeking outside help never even crossed his mind. All he wanted was to escape this nightmare, to put as much distance between himself and the woodland strangler as possible. But Ephraim urged him to stay, insisting that they needed to make sure the creature was truly gone. And so, over the next several days, the two men worked together, scouring the woods for any sign of the beast. They never ventured too far from the cabin, always keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings, but the unease that had settled over them refused to dissipate. The wound on Felton's arm burned with a peculiar intensity, a constant reminder of his brush with the woodland strangler. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of their situation became increasingly clear. Despite their best efforts, they could find no concrete evidence of the creature's existence, no way to make sense of the nightmare that had unfolded in the heart of the forest. The creature's motivations, if it could even be said to possess such things, remained a mystery, an enigma that defied all attempts at understanding. And with each passing day, the anxiety that gnawed at Felton's soul only grew stronger, a chilling certainty that the woodland strangler was still out there, waiting, watching. In the end, there was only one course of action left to him. With a heavy heart, Felton sold the cabin and the surrounding property, severing his ties to the place that had brought him so much terror. Ephraim supported his decision, but the ranger vowed to keep a watchful eye on the area, to be vigilant in case the creature ever returned. As Felton left Moreland behind, he couldn't shake the feeling that a part of him would always remain in those woods, forever haunted by the memory of the woodland strangler. In the months and years that followed, he would occasionally receive phone calls from Ephraim, the ranger's voice heavy with the weight of new disappearances, fresh reminders of the horror that lurked among the trees. But eventually even those calls began to taper off, leaving Felton to wonder if Ephraim had found his own way to cope with the nightmare they had shared, or if perhaps the ranger had become another victim of the creature's insatiable hunger. Though life moved on, the memories of that fateful encounter never truly faded. For Felton, the woodland strangler would always be there, a specter lurking in the darkest corners of his mind, a waking nightmare from which there could be no escape. And sometimes, in the stillness of the night, he would swear he could hear the distant crashing of something large and terrible, moving through the trees, a reminder that some horrors never truly die. I never should have taken this job, but when you're drowning in debt and desperate for a way out, you'll grasp at anything that comes your way, even if it means venturing into dark places you have no business being. My name is Ethan. I'm 32 years old, and until a few months ago, I was your average guy living in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I had a decent apartment, a car that mostly ran, and a job tending bar to pay the bills. Things were tight, but I was getting by. That is, until my hours got cut and the credit card companies came calling. Late payments, missed payments, fees upon fees. It all piled up faster than I could dig my way out. Collection agencies hounded me day and night. My credit score tanked. I was on the verge of losing everything. So when an old army buddy reached out about a vague but well-paying government contract job, I leapt at the chance. The details were sparse. Something about securing assets in remote areas. Matt couldn't tell me more unless I signed on. All I knew was it involved a lot of hiking and camping in state and national forests across the country. Oregon, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Wisconsin. I liked the outdoors well enough. Grew up hunting and fishing with my dad. Did my share of roughing it in the service, so I figured, what the hell? I signed the forms, passed the background check, and a week later I was on a plane to Oregon for training. That's when things got weird. A dozen other guys, all vets like me, stuffed in a dingy motel conference room. No windows. Our trainers could have stepped out of any cheesy G-Man movie. Black suits, crew cuts, dead-eyed stares. They wasted no time with pleasantries. Your job is to patrol these wilderness areas. You're looking for trespassers, illegal activities, any signs of suspicious activity. A stone-faced suit droned. Trespassers? In the middle of the damn woods? One of the guys piped up. Who are we supposed to find out there, Bigfoot? The spook fixed him with an icy glare. You'd be surprised. There are things out there that need to be contained. Your job is to keep civilians away and report anything unusual. He clicked to a map of Oregon, big patches shaded in red. These are your assigned sectors. You'll work solo. 2 weeks on, 1 week off. We'll drop you at the trailhead and pick you up at the end. Any other questions? A hand shot up. Yeah, what exactly are we supposed to do if we find any trespassers out there? There are protocols. You'll be briefed in the field. Just remember. He clicked to one last slide, big red letters on black. If you encounter anything you can't handle, don't try to be a hero. Call it in and get the hell out. No one's asking you to die out there. After that rousing speech, the real fun started. Forms. My first hitch in the Oregon wilderness started out about how you'd expect. Lots of hiking through dense old-growth forests, keeping an eye out for any signs of life, animal, human, or otherwise. The orders were to hike the delineated trails and off-trail routes each day, documenting anything I saw in a grid-like sweep of the territory. Standard search and overwatch stuff I remembered from the Army. Only now I was alone, weighed down by a shockingly heavy backpack of gear, some of which I had never seen before and wasn't told the purpose of. Questions were met with only, "When the time comes, you'll know how to use it." When I wasn't walking, I made camp in sites marked on the map they gave me. Heavily reinforced tents with battery-powered lanterns and floodlights I was to keep on all night. Sleep in armor with a rifle and handheld location beacon always within arm's reach. You know, just normal, relaxing stuff for guarding against trespassers. As the days wore on, I fell into a routine. Rise before dawn, force down some god-awful MRE oatmeal, patrol the woods all day, make camp, huddle in my armored sleeping bag, praying the batteries held through the night, repeat. I saw no signs of human activity beyond the occasional old fire pit or faded beer can on the first leg. Plenty of animals, though. More than you'd expect. It was eerie how they just silently appear on the trail, watching me with black, fathomless eyes before melting back into the trees. Deer, coyotes, bears, cougars. But something was off about them. Their coats seemed ragged and patchy. They trembled and twitched as if barely suppressing the instinct to pounce and rip my throat out. And those stares, there was a malevolence there. A seething hatred completely at odds with any creature I'd encountered before. I did my best to ignore it, to convince myself it was just nerves, that I'd acclimate to the solitude and stress, if only that were the case. About a week in is when it all started going sideways. I was setting up camp for the night in a small clearing. The sun had already vanished behind the hills, plunging the forest into inky darkness beyond the halo of my spotlights. As I went about the now familiar routine of pitching the tent, I was stopped dead by an echoing boom reverberating through the trees. My blood ran cold. It sounded for all the world like cannon fire. But that wasn't possible. I was miles from anything. No roads, no one else assigned to this sector. Where the hell was it coming from? I barely had time to ponder before there was a tremendous crack, and the ground rippled beneath my feet. That's the only way I can describe it. It was as if some great beast had taken the forest floor in its jaws and shook it like a chew toy. I was tossed from my feet as decades-old pines groaned and swayed around me. Earthquake, I thought dumbly as I lay stunned on the quivering ground. Had to be. But that sound. I pushed myself to my knees as the tremor subsided. A tree before me had cracked under the strain and come crashing down, its trunk splintered like a spent matchstick. A plume of dust swirled over the rupture as the earth settled. No, not dust. Mist. An oddly glutinous bluish vapor was seeping up from the fissure like pus from an infected wound. It hung in the air far longer than it should have before slowly dissipating. I didn't know how to process what I was seeing, but as a suffocating heaviness spread through my chest and a coppery taste crept up my throat, some newly awakened instinct screamed danger. I staggered to my feet, seized my pack, and ran blindly in the direction of my evac site. Only one thought penetrated the haze of panic as I crashed madly through the underbrush. What the hell did I just witness? And what had I gotten myself into? The helicopter couldn't take me far enough away from that nightmare in the woods. I spent the week's furlough holed up in my shitty apartment, alternately trying to drown the memory in cheap whiskey and obsessively Googling what could possibly explain what I experienced. Blue mist from a fissure after tectonic activity? Nada. Maybe I had imagined the unnatural hue and viscosity, some sort of underground gas suddenly released by the quake. A geological anomaly no one's bothered to study out in the remote wilds of Oregon. The problem was, even stone drunk, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I saw was just plain wrong, against the laws of nature, evil. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it hanging there in the shadows of the forest, watching, waiting for me to return. But what choice did I have? Walk away and go back to dodging creditors trying to squeeze blood from my stone-broke life? No, I had signed a contract. I needed this job. So when the next rotation came up, there I was checking out my restocked pack. Only this time I made damn sure to pack my own essentials. Holy water, a large silver cross, salt. Hey, it couldn't hurt. In a cruel twist, they sent me to the opposite side of the country for round 2. The hills and hollows of western North Carolina. Different trees, same routine. Schlep through the wilderness, watch out for things that go bump in the night. They paired me with another guy for this trip, Wade. Built like a linebacker and just as intelligent. Guess they figured I could use the company after my behavior in debrief, or a witness if I cracked up. Wade didn't strike me as the type to worry about phantom miasmas lurking in the woods. He yucked it up at my expense the whole hike in. So what spooked you in Oregon, city boy? You see Bigfoot out there dropping a squat behind a redwood? He guffawed. Nah, just a weird earthquake. Messed with my head is all. He looked at me sideways. Uh-huh. Let's see how long till the boogeymen get you this time, shitbrick. Wade's presence was alternately irritating and a relief. He was a jackass, but at least he was a human jackass. Another set of eyes and ears, even if he used them mostly to bust my balls. We set up our camps in eyesight of each other, close enough to see the other's spotlight glowing against the night, but too far to make out details. Just an orange smudge through the pitch-black, deciduous forest. The feeling crept up on me slowly this time, that unshakable sense of being watched from the shadows, the skin-crawling sensation of unseen eyes boring holes in your back. Every rustle of dead leaves looked like skittering movement in the dark. Every hoot and whistle of nightbirds twisted into mocking laughter in my ears. I jerked my spotlight around wildly, expecting to see some twisted thing lunging from the abyss, only to find branches waving innocently in the breeze. Get it together, man, I tried to tell myself. It's just woods. Perfectly normal woods like you've been in 1,000 times, but that oppressive sense of dread only seemed to grow thicker as the night deepened. I tried to take solace in Wade's sporadic radio checks. He made a point to throw in a snide joke every time. All quiet on the western front, shitstain. No chupacabras making off with your undies. Real classy. But around 0300 he abruptly cut off mid-sentence with a high yelp. Then silence. I called for him. Nothing. I clicked over to the emergency channel. Wade, report. What's your status, over? My only answer was a crackle of static. Then faintly what sounded like rustling and snapping brush. Was he prowling around out there? Maybe taking an unauthorized leak? Wade, what's your location? I say again, what is your location and status? The rustling stopped. For a moment there was only hiss. Then a noise came through the radio that turned my blood to ice water in my veins. It was a gagging retch, as if someone was trying to scream through a mouthful of mud. And it was coming closer. In the distance I saw Wade's spotlight flare wildly like a strobe, flashing across the trunks, sweeping across the ground, then swinging crazily into the air. The gurgling static seemed to keep pace, growing louder as his light went haywire. Then, with one last spasm, the light went dark, leaving me blind. The gurgling rattle stopped with a sickening finality. I screamed for Wade until my voice went hoarse. I screamed for him to answer me, to tell me where he was. I screamed because the only thing more unbearable than the screaming was the nothingness that answered. They pulled me out of there at first light. I couldn't tell them much. just that Wade had gone silent in the night, and I had been unable to raise him again. The way they looked at me as I stammered through it, I could tell what they were thinking, that I was a hysterical headcase jumping at shadows. And maybe I was, because when they found him later that day, it was as if nothing had happened. He was sitting with his back against a tree in his camp, facing the cold remains of his fire. Just sitting there. Not a mark on him according to the report. But they wouldn't let me see the body before they shipped it home. Apparently it was too disturbing for my fragile mental state. I tried to tell them something had come for him, that I had heard it over the radio. Hell, maybe that it had made him do something to himself, but it was useless. I could see in their eyes I was a babbling madman to them. They sent me home to recuperate. Didn't contact me again for weeks. I went through the motions, pretended to put on a brave face at Wade's closed casket funeral, endured the judgmental stares and whispers of the other mercs who'd heard I was the last one to talk to him. But in my apartment, it was a different story. I obsessed over every detail of that night, turned it over and over in my head until I was sure I would crack, because there was one detail I omitted in my report. One tiny thing that I was sure meant I hadn't imagined it all. Just before Wade's radio had gone dead, in that final burst of screeching static, I had heard chanting. A rhythmic murmur I could barely make out. Non sonus sed murmur in lingua ignota. It wasn't any language I recognized, but something about the cadence sent primordial shivers up my spine, as if the sound reached directly into the most ancient recesses of my brain and gibbered madly in my skull. I threw myself into research anew, not geology this time. No, I scoured the dark corners of the internet for anything on mysterious chanting, mass hysterias, unseen forest predators with a taste for human flesh. I must have put every possible keyword combination into Google. Most of what I found was the usual conspiracy theory nutjobbery and creepypasta urban legends, but there was one hit, on a forum so obscure I had to wonder how it even ended up in the search results. The post was a scanned page from a battered, ancient-looking book. The letters were faded and the image resolution was shit, but I could just make out the title, On the Nature of Those Who Dwell Beneath. The writing was dense, almost impenetrable, full of words I'd never seen before and philosophical ramblings on metaphysical concepts that made my head spin. But one passage leapt out at me. Of the many blasphemies that do slither upon the skin of the earth, none compare in vileness to they who wait, ever hunger in the interstice. Not devil nor demon are they, but of the spaces between. Glimpse not their totality, for thy mind be not fortified to withstand the writhing revelation. Speak not unto them the words, lest their ever-twisting forms be drawn through the cracks to glut upon the sanity of man. Seal the ways, ward the doors, and pray the ancient tongue never again be loosed, for they do listen. My head throbbed trying to parse it. The interstice? The spaces between what? Glimpsing their totality? Was the author trying to say there are things that exist outside our world, just waiting for some ancient phrase to let them in? I'd laugh it off as the ravings of a lunatic if it didn't frisson down my spine like icy fingers. Non sonus sed murmur in lingua ignota. Not sound, but a murmur in an unknown tongue. Had Wade stumbled onto this forbidden language? Had something made him speak it? The enormity of the implications threatened to send me spiraling into gibbering insanity. If any of this was real, these woods, and those of us sent to patrol them, were just flimsy wards over yawning chasms of cosmic horror. And I had a front row seat to the unraveling. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't relieved to be shipped off to the relative tameness of Pennsylvania next. No sprawling wilderness to disappear into, just a patchwork of state forests nestled among sleepy, economically depressed little towns. It was almost picturesque. The powers that be put me back on solo duty. But this time my nightly marching orders had mysteriously expanded. In addition to perimeter checks and general fuckery watches, I was to look for a very specific list of sigils and symbols carved into trees or stone outcroppings. Each was described in unnervingly meticulous detail in a packet with eyes only dripping from every page in menacing red ink. The instructions were clear enough. If I found any such markings, I was to immediately document its precise location, seal off the area, and await further instructions. Under no circumstances was I to investigate any noises or indications of human activity nearby, and this part was in all caps and underlined. Do not attempt to transcribe, vocalize, or again otherwise reproduce the sigil. It was impossible to read those words without flashing back to the horrors in North Carolina. Those otherworldly murmurs still gibbered in the back of my brain on endless loop. Why did they need a glossary of the damn things? What were they afraid some impressionable fool would read off a tree? I spent the daylight hours feeling like an overgrown Boy Scout, all but pressing leaves between wax paper to hunt down the verboten glyphs. Where did they even get these things? They looked like the doodlings of a schizophrenic Satanist, all jagged lines and ominous geometry forming patterns that seared themselves into your mind's eye. Unsurprisingly, I didn't find squat, but that didn't stop them from extending my rotation indefinitely. Cool, damp fall days bled into frigid winter nights that bit to the bone. I grew accustomed to constantly feeling watched, to jumping at every snapping twig despite never seeing another soul, until one frozen crystal midnight when the pines loomed like stone sentinels frosted in starlight. I heard it, hissing between gusts of the bone-chilling wind, a frantic rustling and splintering, the sound of something thrashing against wood like a caged animal. I crept trembling through snowdrifts toward the ruckus, unslinging my rifle with fingers too numb to feel the safety clicking off. I was close enough to make out the outline of one of the massive slab-like boulders that dotted the woods around here, incongruous among the sapling trees but too big to ever move. It seemed to be the epicenter of the swirling maelstrom of action. Except as I got closer, my spotlight fell on something that nearly buckled my knees, gouged into the face of the granite so deep it looked carved with steel rather than claws, was one of the sigils, a twisted spiral matrix of lines converging on a complex key-like shape. The rock around it was violently scraped and abraded, as if something had been desperately trying to erase it. Even as my mind worked to accept what it was seeing, my radio crackled to life. But this time it wasn't the uncanny murmurs of forbidden speech or the burbling death rattle of a friend. No, this was a howl of purest agony and rage that stabbed into my very core. It rose up as if from the very ground itself, then cut off suddenly, replaced by only hissing static. In the silent aftermath, with only the howl of the wind for company, I slowly backed away from the sigil. That scream still reverberated in my bones, inhuman and ancient. I knew then things had reached a tipping point I wasn't prepared for, and the only direction was down, into yawning darkness without end. The mercs wouldn't let me come in from the cold after that. Every time I raised the incident up the chain, insisting on some answers, damn it, I was told to sit tight and await orders. The few times I pushed hard enough to reach an actual human on our support line, they assured me a specialist team was dispatched to investigate the site. Fat lot of good that did me with my ass still stranded in the frosty wilderness, wondering what fresh nightmare would come for me next. After nearly a week of radio silence, I gave serious thought to going AWOL. I mean, really, what was worse, rotting in a military prison somewhere or freezing to death as an eldritch chew toy? I could stash my gear, hike to the nearest town, and hop the first Greyhound to anywhere. But every time I mustered the nerve, the logistics stymied me. How far off the grid would I have to go to avoid the long arm of Uncle Sam pissed that I've seen too much? With my mug and background, they'd have me on every watch list from here to Timbuktu. And say I did manage to rabbit, then what? Even if I wasn't dragged back to face a court-martial faster than you can say habeas corpus, I'd still be a broke-dick fugitive. At least this gig kept me solvent, if not sane. I resigned myself to running down the clock, however long it took my paymasters to remember I existed. That was the plan, anyway, right up until a chittering tidal wave of fur and teeth damn near ran me down in the night. Pennsylvania's state animal is the white-tailed deer. Docile herbivores more likely to end up as a smear on a windshield than anything else. I'd seen plenty of the dainty bastards flitting between the trees or staring dopily at me with doe eyes that'd melt the heart of even a jaded merc like myself. What came crashing toward me that moonless night was a twisted corruption of the species. Their eyes flashed like silvered mirrors in my spotlight, wide with rolling terror. Spittle flew from gaping jaws lined with entirely too many teeth, wickedly pointed like a shark's endless maw. Dirt and leaf litter plumed in clouds under the stamp of hoof sparks skittering on stone. A tide of pale, undulating hide washed over the forest floor, parting begrudgingly around the boulder that marked my world's end, then crashing back together in a single churning stream. I had just enough presence of mind to throw myself aside, narrowly avoiding getting trampled to paste by the horde. For a single, stretching moment, I lay gasping for breath as dozens, maybe hundreds of the panicked beasts thundered past close enough to feel the heat pouring off their heaving flanks. Saucer-plate eyes rolled madly in heads that seemed deformed, bulging in unnatural places. Hooves frothed with an iridescent ooze that sizzled where it splattered. But it wasn't until the last of the herd vanished into the gloom that I saw the real horror pacing calmly behind them. At first my mind refused to accept it was there at all. Just a shadow among shadows, an absence where the night seemed a shade darker. But then it shifted and I saw it. I really saw it. And dear Christ, how I wish I could unsee. My sanity cracked with the monolith. Or maybe it had been straining under the weight of nightly horrors for so long that seeing the impossible made manifest was the final hammer blow to shatter it completely. How else could I process the squamous obscenity I saw unfolding before me? In that infinite fractured second, my mind scrabbled desperately for any anchor of logic to cling to. Optical illusion. Some trick of the light stretching shadows into looming bat-winged gargoyles studded with far, far too many eyes. Fatigue hallucinations painting oily, swirling color onto undulating flesh that seemed to writhe independent of physical reality. Marsh gas, ball lightning, the god, damned, chupacabra. I'd take any pseudoscientific explanation as long as it meant the thing hovering over the ancient stone wasn't real. That the gate of my perception hadn't been ripped off its hinges to admit horrors beyond human comprehension. But the chanting wouldn't stop. It scraped gleefully at the inside of my skull, gurgling and yammering in ecstatic frenzy. The same guttural syllables I had been tormented with night after night, now clawing their way into my ears with triumphal shrieking. Through the cacophony, I could just make out sounds that had no place outside a slaughterhouse killing floor. Tearing flesh, crunching bone, wet gobbling, and underneath it all, keening wails of animal agony abruptly silenced with meaty thwacks. I scrabbled backward on numb limbs, the need to put distance between myself and the unholy butchery overriding all reason. Gravel dug into my palms, but I welcomed the sting. The bright jolt of pain reminded me I was a living, feeling being and not some numb hunk of meat to be reality's whipping boy. A treacherous root caught my ankle and I sprawled backward. I lay there panting for a breathless moment, the coppery taste of terror thick on my tongue. My head craned back, dreading what I would see, but masochistically compelled to look. I almost wept with relief. The thing was gone, winked out of existence between one blink and the next. Even the chanting had abruptly cut off, leaving only the tinny whine of my radio's open channel. But the monolith remained. In the stark beam of my flashlight, I could see the runnels and whorls carved into its surface glistening wetly, as if it had been doused in... Oh God. I rolled and retched into the dirt until it felt like my stomach was trying to turn inside out, bringing up nothing but bile and pure animal fear. This was so far beyond anything I had trained for, had ever conceived of facing. This primordial dread of the dark, the knowledge there were things, hungry and malevolent, skulking in the abyss just waiting for their chance to taste sweet oblivion. And I was expected to, what, keep them in check armed with nothing but a rifle and some half-assed sigils of protection? The utter cosmic futility of it all would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pants-shittingly petrifying. Once my stomach settled and my head cleared fractionally, I staggered to my feet with the bone-deep certainty I had to get the hell away from this place. Screw the mission, screw going AWOL. Spending the rest of my life in Leavenworth was vastly preferable to whatever gibbering void-born nightmare would come oozing out of the dark next. I made it 3 steps before the discordant blare of the alert signal exploded from my radio, full volume, a shrill electronic screech like a robot banshee wailing. It was the emergency beacon, a final foobar alarm we all hoped never to hear because it meant one thing: containment had failed. The door was open, and all the mad dancing horrors of beyond were flooding through. Non sonus sed murmur in lingua ignota. I ran because it was the only sane thing to do when faced with the complete unraveling of reality as I had known it. Tore through those woods like all the legions of hell were on my heels, and for all I knew, they very well could be. Branches lashed my face and stones turned underfoot, but I paid them no mind. The sting of abraded flesh and ache of bruises meant I was still alive, still human, despite the best efforts of the squirming obscenities nipping at my sanity. All thoughts of escape routes and contingency plans were forgotten in the primal urge to put as much distance as possible between myself and the abattoir I had stumbled into. I pelted in the vague direction of my evac point, desperately hoping whatever spook squad had been assigned to rein in this unmitigated clusterfuck would be there to airlift me far, far away from this blasted patch of hell on earth. But the horrors weren't content to let me abscond so easily. The very trees seemed to warp and twist around me, trunks flexing like melted wax to disgorge skittering many-legged things that spat and clicked in voices never meant for human ears. Shadows stretched and bubbled, birthing writhing feelers that groped after my pounding feet. And still that damnable chanting hissed and screamed from my radio, ululating exultation in the release of long-pent nightmares. What had been a well-worn path was now a labyrinthine gauntlet of Stygian horror. I veered and careened between grasping boughs and hissing phantasms, lungs searing and heart jackhammering against my ribs. Every frenzied glance over my shoulder revealed only more eldritch blights clawing their way into a world never meant to bear witness to their hideousness. At long last, I saw it. The blessed matte black of a military chopper crouched in a clearing not 50 yards ahead. Its rotors were already thrashing the air, ready to lift away at a moment's notice. And silhouetted against that wondrous vision were a line of stony-faced men in unmarked black combat gear, the cavalry come to beat back the dark. I didn't break stride until I was almost on top of them, every nerve still screaming to escape. But as I skidded to a halt, gasping out breathless thanks to my saviors, I knew something was wrong. Their faces, dear God, their faces. What should have been the hard, no-nonsense masks of soldiers were instead twisted in rictuses of ecstatic anguish. Eyes rolled back into skulls, jaws distended at unnatural angles, and the sounds coming from their throats, the chanting, that same nerve-shredding ancient tongue, pouring out in a megalithic chorus, and in their upraised hands not rifles, but stone tablets covered in blasphemous sigils and whorls. The gate wards shattered. I stumbled back as hands grabbed for me, gnarled and tipped in cracked yellow nails. A howl built in my chest, but it never made it past my lips. The squeal of my radio spiked unbearably shrill, and with a burst of light and sound the night fell away completely. In the black behind my eyes, a city of cyclopean stone unfolded, ancient and brooding with malevolence. Pillars of words I could never conceive formed and unformed, vaulting into chasms that had never known light. And there, at the center of it all, a presence looming and hungry, its grasping tendrils unfurling to welcome me into its cosmic maw. I awoke in my apartment, sheets drenched in cold sweat, and that final vision still swimming behind my eyelids. Was it real? A warning dredged up from beyond the veil of the possible? Or just another skipping track in my fracturing mind, trying desperately to process the blasphemies it had borne witness to? I don't know. I'm not sure I want to know. But what I am certain of is that the shadows look a little darker now, a little heavier with the weight of old and patient hungers, waiting for their chance to crack the seals and come writhing through, glutting on a world gone mad with their revelations. And I'm expected to return, to delve back into those abyssal haunts, armed with ritual and ward, a finger in the dam of the cosmos. God help me, I know I will, because now that I've seen what squirms and gibbers behind the curtain, how could I not? Even if it costs me the last ragged shreds of my sanity, even if in the end the only escape is to become one with their primal screaming dark. I'll dance along the edge of that gaping abyss, praying I can keep my footing, praying that ancient tongue stays lost, muzzled behind the gates of my teeth, because I know it now. Oh yes, it sings to me always, just below the threshold of hearing, hungry and waiting. Non sonus sed murmur in lingua ignota. The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon as I pulled into the empty dirt lot at the trailhead. At 28 years old, I was one of the younger park rangers in the Whispering Pines National Forest. But despite my age, the lines on my face and the calluses on my hands told the story of someone who had already seen a lot in this line of work. I had grown up in the suburbs of Chicago, a far cry from the dense wilderness that had become my home these last few years. As a kid, I was always happiest outside, whether exploring the neighborhood creek or camping with the Boy Scouts. I earned my Eagle Scout rank at 17 and went on to study forestry at University of Wisconsin. But after graduation, with student loans to pay off and limited job prospects in my field, I struggled financially. That's when I started applying to park ranger openings all across the country. I ended up taking seasonal positions at state and national parks in Michigan, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. The pay was modest, but I loved the work, being outdoors, maintaining trails, and teaching visitors about nature and conservation. 4 months ago, I accepted a permanent role here in the vast Whispering Pines wilderness of northern Wisconsin. I was excited for the stability and chance to really get to know one forest, but I also knew this remote assignment came with risks. More than one ranger had gone missing in these woods over the years. As I laced up my boots in the crisp morning air, a raven cawed ominously from the pines above. An involuntary shiver ran down my spine, as if the bird could sense something I could not. I pushed the thought away, double-checked my pack, and set off down the trail to begin my patrol. Little did I know the true dangers and secrets that lay ahead, deep in the shadow of the Whispering Pines. The winding trail took me past towering hemlocks, gnarled oaks, and lichen-covered boulders. Golden shafts of early light streamed down through the canopy. It was the kind of raw, primeval beauty that could steal your breath away. This was what I lived for out here. After about 3 miles, I came to a fork in the path. The main trail continued straight towards Blackwood Falls, the most popular hiking destination in the forest. A fainter track veered off to the left, quickly becoming overgrown and vanishing into a sea of ferns. This spur trail wasn't on any official park map. In fact, very few people knew it existed at all. According to local legend, the trail led to the ruins of an abandoned logging camp from the early 1900s. The story goes that one winter, the camp was mysteriously abandoned, with half-eaten meals still on the tables and the loggers' tools left behind. Rumors abounded about what really happened, ranging from a deadly smallpox outbreak to a Wendigo attack. As a ranger, I generally consider myself a rational person, not someone prone to superstition or believing in old folklore. But I had to admit there was something deeply unsettling about that place. I had only hiked out to the old camp ruins once before, during my first week on the job. It had left me with an intense feeling of unease that I couldn't quite shake. The rotting timbers of the bunkhouse, the scatter of rusted saws and axes, the oppressive silence and sensation of being watched. It all came together in an almost palpable aura of lingering malevolence. I had no desire to go back again. I was just about to continue on towards Blackwood Falls when a flicker of color caught my eye. There, trampled into the mud at the entrance to the spur trail, was a scrap of bright blue fabric, probably a piece of a hiker's raincoat. It looked relatively fresh. My brow furrowed in concern. Someone had gone up that trail very recently, likely unaware of the area's history and potential hazards. I sighed, adjusting my pack as I turned onto the overgrown path, following the errant hiker's tracks. So much for avoiding the forlorn sight. But the duty of a ranger is to protect and serve park visitors, even if that means heading into places we'd rather not go. The Whispering Pines closed in around me as I left the main trail behind and ventured into the forest's deeper secrets. The slap of branches against my legs and the crunch of old pine needles underfoot were the only sounds as I moved deeper into the forest. The air felt somehow thicker here, like the above-ground equivalent of diving into dark water. The track I was following had become faint and sporadic, marked only by the occasional bent fern or muddy boot print. After about 20 more minutes of hiking, the crumbling stone chimney of the logging camp's old mess hall emerged through the trees ahead. A rusty cast-iron stove sat in a clump of soggy leaves nearby, like a strange metal mushroom. The sun-bleached skeletons of the bunkhouses and worksheds lay scattered amid the underbrush. I found myself straining to listen for any human sounds in the heavy stillness. With each step, my sense of foreboding grew. There was no sign of the hiker in the immediate vicinity of the camp ruins. Biting my lip, I called out in a voice that seemed too loud in the expectant hush. "Hello, this is Ranger Cyrus with the Park Service. Is there anyone out here?" My words were swallowed up by the forest almost as soon as I spoke them. For a long moment there was no reply. Then, just as I was about to call out again, I heard it, a strangled cry, abruptly cut off, somewhere in the pines behind the stone chimney. My blood ran cold. I had heard the screams of injured hikers before. This was different. There was a raw, almost inhuman quality to it, like an animal caught in a trap. I took off at a sprint, crashing through the nettle undergrowth towards the source of the cry. As I rounded the chimney ruin, my feet skidded to a halt, sending up a spray of decaying pine needles. About 20 yards ahead, a bright blue object lay crumpled at the base of a massive hemlock tree. My stomach lurched as I realized it was a rain jacket, with a person still inside it. I rushed over and crouched down beside the hiker. It was a young woman, around my age. Her dark hair was matted with leaves, and there was a bluish cast to her pale skin. I had begun reaching out to check for a pulse when her eyes suddenly snapped open. Her lips parted in a ragged gasp, as if she were trying to scream but couldn't draw enough air. "It's okay, I've got you," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm as I slid my arms under her shoulders to lift her. "I'm with the Park Service. I'm going to get you out of here." The woman didn't seem to register my words. Her gaze remained fixed over my shoulder at some unseen point deep in the trees. With what looked like a tremendous effort, she managed to choke out 2 words. "It's here." Then her eyes rolled back and she went limp in my arms. Swallowing hard, I hoisted her up and slung her over my shoulder. As I turned to carry her back down the trail, I couldn't resist glancing behind me into the gloom where she had been staring, and for just an instant, I thought I glimpsed a flicker of unnaturally pale flesh and dark, malevolent eyes among the tangle of branches and shadows. Then it was gone, leaving me to wonder if I really saw anything at all. By the time I made it back to my truck with the unconscious hiker slung over my shoulder, my heart was thundering against my ribcage. I could feel the adrenaline spike starting to ebb, replaced by a cold sweat between my shoulder blades. What the hell had I just seen out there? Or maybe more accurately, what had seen me? I placed an emergency call on the park radio to request an ambulance to the trailhead. Then I carefully laid the woman across the back seat of my pickup. Her breathing was shallow but steady. I checked her vitals as best as I could, pulse thready but present, no obvious external injuries besides some scrapes and bruises. But what really worried me was how she remained unresponsive, almost catatonic, and those 2 haunting words she had managed to gasp out, "It's here." The wail of sirens approached just as I finished radioing in my report to the chief ranger. I shielded my eyes against the whirling red lights as the ambulance pulled up. A blur of uniform-clad EMTs rushed to transfer the hiker onto a stretcher and attach an IV line and oxygen mask. They peppered me with questions about what happened as they worked. I answered as best I could while omitting any mention of what I thought I saw by the old logging camp. The last thing I needed was the chief thinking his new ranger was cracking up and jumping at shadows already. As I watched the ambulance door slam shut and the vehicle speed away down the access road with a fading Doppler whine, I tried to reassure myself with logic and reason. There had to be a rational explanation for all this, an explanation that didn't involve murderous ghosts from old lumberjack folktales. The woman probably just had a bad fall, hit her head, and was hallucinating from a concussion. And in the chaos of the moment, hopped up on adrenaline, my mind just projected my own invented spooks into the shadows. Nothing more than that. It couldn't be anything more than that. I took a deep, steadying breath of the piney air. This was a setback, to be sure, but I was still a ranger with a job to do. I couldn't let myself get rattled and go chasing imaginary monsters. I had to focus on my patrol, make sure any other hikers out there today were accounted for and safe. Whatever actually happened to that poor woman was a matter for the doctors now. Time for me to get back to reality. I was just reaching for the handle of my truck door when the radio crackled to life again on my belt. The dispatcher's normally unflappable voice had a distinct edge to it as she said, "All units report of a possible missing child in the vicinity of Owl Creek Trailhead. Young boy, age 7, blonde hair, red jacket. Mother says he wandered away from their campsite early this morning. Rangers in the vicinity, please respond and commence search protocols." I closed my eyes for a moment, swallowing back the ghost of old grief. Cases with kids always hit me hard. Taking another deep breath, I unclipped the radio and raised it to my lips. Ranger Cyrus on scene, resuming patrol and redirecting to Owl Creek Trailhead. I'll take the Briarwood Trail and work my way up the creek drainage. Copy that, Ranger Cyrus. Keep us updated. Dispatch out. I tossed my pack back in the cab and slammed the door. Missing kids trumped any imaginary monsters in terms of what demanded my attention right now. I could only hope I would find this boy quickly, safe and sound, because an unnerving thought lurked at the edges of my mind as I started up the trail at a brisk clip. Owl Creek fed directly into the same ravine where the old logging camp ruins lay nestled in the forest's shadow. The spongy bed of dry pine needles muffled my footsteps to near silence as I moved swiftly up the Briarwood Trail. Dust motes swirled in the sun shafts slanting down through the Douglas firs. Any other day I might have slowed my pace to savor the forest's quiet majesty. But right now my senses were honed for one purpose only, finding the little wanderer in the red jacket. I scanned the verge on either side, searching for any glimpse of bright color amid the orange-brown duff and evergreen boughs. I reached the junction with Owl Creek and paused to catch my breath. The crystalline trickle of water over stones beckoned me upstream, into a maze of fern and huckleberry thickets. Spotting child-sized footprints in the loamy creek bank, I pushed on into the shadowed ravine. My heart stuttered with each flash of red, a crimson patch of Indian paintbrush here, a russet stone there, but never the jacket I was desperately hoping to spot. About a mile up the drainage, I emerged into a small glade screened by sword ferns and carpeted with buttercups. A granite boulder hunched in the center like a sleeping troll, and there, perched atop the mossy stone, was a little tow-headed boy in a bright red windbreaker. But he wasn't alone. Across from the boy, a spindly, elongated figure crouched, nearly blending in with the dappled shadows. Tattered rags, the color of forest loam, hung from its emaciated frame. At first I thought it must be a lost hiker in camo, until it turned towards me and I caught a glimpse of its face. Waxy, ash-white skin stretched over protruding bones, sunken sockets like black marbles, thin lips peeled back from jagged teeth in a horrible rictus grin. For an instant, I stood frozen, my brain unable to process the nightmare apparition before me. This couldn't be real. But then the ghoul stretched out one stick-thin arm towards the oblivious child, its long nails curving into claws, and my paralysis broke. "Hey!" I yelled, yanking my taser from my belt and holding it in front of me with a hand that shook. "Get away from him!" The boy started at my shout and twisted around. The creature's head snapped up, fixing me with its lightless eyes. For a moment, nobody moved. I couldn't seem to draw a breath, as if the air had turned solid in my lungs. Then several things happened at once. I thumbed the safety off my taser, hearing it whine to life. The boy, sensing something very wrong, scrambled backwards off the boulder with a frightened cry, and the ghoul pounced. I got off one wild shot with the taser as the creature lunged, but the electrode darts went wide, burying themselves harmlessly in a cedar trunk. And then impossibly strong, bone-cold fingers closed around my throat, and I found myself staring into a face out of the depths of nightmare, inches from my own. Up close, I could see the gray-green tinge to the thing's skin, the spiderweb of black veins pulsing beneath the surface. I gagged on the carrion reek of its breath, hot on my face. My scrabbling fingers found no purchase on the rubbery flesh. Just as my vision started to tunnel, I managed to bring my knee up hard into what would have been a groin, had this been human. To my surprise, I felt a distinct give, and the creature hissed in pain, its claws loosening for a moment around my neck. I took advantage of the reprieve to wrench free, gasping for air. "Run!" I yelled to the boy, who sat paralyzed with terror a few yards away. As he stumbled to his feet, I lowered my head and charged the staggering monster before it could regain its balance, catching it hard in the midsection and driving it back against the granite boulder with a sickening crunch. The ghoul thrashed and screamed beneath me, a sound that knifed straight to some primordial core of fear in my brain. but even as I grappled with the flailing creature, I could feel its wiry strength surging up again, an unnatural vitality in its desiccated sinews. With a burst of adrenaline, I managed to pin its wrist long enough to find my canister of bear spray on my belt. Wrenching the nozzle to face it, I gritted my teeth and unloaded a long blast directly in what passed for its face. The thing shrieked like a damned soul, convulsing as the pepper spray sizzled its bulging eyes. A moment later, the wail turned into a choking rattle, and the ghoul went limp. Sides heaving, I scrambled back from the twitching body. I swiped a trembling hand across my stinging eyes and cracked lips. Then I remembered the boy. Whirling around, I scanned the glade, my heart seizing when I didn't immediately see him. But then a rustle drew my gaze to the screen of bracken near the creek, where a small red jacket peeped out from behind a nurse log. "Hey there," I called softly, slowly raising my hands to show I meant no harm. "Are you all right?" The boy's tear-stained face emerged from behind the log. He gave a tiny mute nod, his lower lip trembling. I approached slowly and knelt down to his level, my voice low and soothing. "My name is Cyrus. I'm a park ranger. Your mom sent me to find you and bring you back safe. Can you tell me your name?" "Danny," he managed to get out between hiccuping sobs. "Is the monster gone?" I glanced over my shoulder at the crumpled form by the boulder. It lay ominously still now. "Yeah, buddy, the monster's gone. You were really brave, you know that? I'm going to get you back to your mom now, okay? Everything's going to be all right." I held out my hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Danny reached out and took it, his small fingers cold in my larger palm. I squeezed gently, trying to impart some reassurance I wasn't sure I felt myself. Together, we made our way back down the ravine, leaving the ghoul's broken remains and the lonely granite sentinel behind in the buttercup glade. Neither of us spoke. Danny kept throwing anxious looks behind us. I focused on maintaining my calm exterior for his sake, though inside my mind reeled. It wasn't so simple as telling myself it was all in my head now. I had seen that thing, felt its claws around my neck, inhaled its fetid breath. It was real, terrifyingly, impossibly real. And it was connected to what had attacked the hiker earlier, I was sure of it. Something evil lurked in the shadows of this forest, an ancient malevolence that I had somehow inadvertently stirred to wakefulness, first with my trespass at the logging camp, and then again with the lost boy. It was as if we had wandered into a dark fairy tale, except I knew with grim certainty this was no bedtime story. The monsters were real, and now that they were roused, I had a feeling their hunt was just beginning. By the time we made it back to the trailhead, a search party had assembled, Danny's tearful mother, a deputy sheriff, a couple other rangers. I handed the boy off to his mother's desperate embrace and gave my report to the chief, a carefully edited version that avoided any mention of ghouls or pepper spray. Just another lost kid, found safe and sound thanks to good old-fashioned ranger fieldcraft. All in a day's work. But as I watched the relieved family drive away and my fellow rangers disperse back to their patrols, I couldn't shake the knot of dread in my gut. I flexed my fingers, remembering the feel of that rubbery skin, the supernatural strength in those emaciated limbs. My eyes strayed again and again to the dark tree line and the deeper wilderness beyond. What else was out there, watching from the shadows, waiting? What would these evil forces try next, now that they knew they had an adversary? Had the abandoned logging camp just scratched the surface of the forest's buried secrets and horrors? I shook my head, trying to dislodge the spiral of grim thoughts and focus on my tasks. Inventory the first aid kit, file my incident report, double-check the alert roster, just keep moving, one foot in front of the other. Whatever this was, I could handle it. I had to. This was my job, my responsibility, because deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. This had only been round one. There would be more, and it would be up to me to hold the line against the darkness. No matter how afraid I was, I couldn't run from this. Not with so many innocent lives at stake. I would stand my ground. I would find a way to fight this evil, to protect those who ventured into my forest. Even if I had to do it alone, because I was the ranger. I was the watcher in the woods and the guardian at the gate, and I would not let the shadows claim anyone else, no matter what nightmares they brought with them to battle. The rain pattered steadily on the shingled roof of the ranger station, the rhythm almost but not quite loud enough to drown out my churning thoughts. I sat at my small desk in the corner, staring at the incident report form glowing on my computer screen. The cursor blinked at me accusingly from a long expanse of white space beneath the heading Details of Incident. My fingers hovered over the keys, hesitating. What could I possibly write that would make any sense to my superiors? Encountered ghoulish creature of indeterminate origin menacing lost child. Creature exhibited extreme resilience and unnatural strength. Neutralized threat with high-grade capsaicin spray. Advise consulting unexplained phenomena expert for further assessment. Yeah, that would get me benched for psych evaluation faster than I could say Sasquatch, but I had to put something in the report. And more importantly, I needed to start figuring out what the hell I was really dealing with out there. My gaze drifted from the screen to the haphazard stacks of books and binders covering nearly every surface in my cramped office. Field guides, trail maps, maintenance manuals, wildlife surveys. In the 4 months I'd been stationed here, I devoured them all, determined to learn everything I could about my new territory. I'd felt confident in my knowledge, secure in my competence to handle anything the job could throw at me. That confidence felt like a bad joke now. None of my park binders had chapters on revenants or how to combat eldritch abominations with camping equipment. I pushed back from my desk with a sigh, rolling my stiff shoulders. My eyes fell on the half-empty mug of coffee at my elbow, now cold. The battered blue enamel conjured a sudden memory, sitting around a campfire as an eager 13-year-old scout, listening wide-eyed as our troop leader spun some tall tale about Indian burial grounds and vengeful native spirits. At the time, they were just stories, the kind of campy horror lore traded around every campfire in the country. But now I wondered, what if there was a kernel of truth in those old yarns? Something the ancient inhabitants of this land knew that modern science dismissed as silly superstition. I thought again of the abandoned logging camp, the aura of dread and misery that hung over its rotting timbers like a fog. The camp dated back to the early 1900s. Who had been here before then? What secrets of the forest might they have buried that the loggers' axes inadvertently exhumed? I drummed my fingers on the worn laminate desktop, trying to order my racing thoughts. I needed information, a place to start chasing down some answers to the 100 new questions swirling in my brain. My first impulse was to Google everything, but what search terms could I possibly use that wouldn't bury me in a ton of useless paranormal junk? Then a different idea surfaced from the recesses of memory. When I had first moved out here, one of the locals I met in town had mentioned something about an eccentric recluse living way off in the far north reaches of the forest. Said the guy was like an encyclopedia of weird historical trivia about the area. At the time, I'd chalked it up as colorful small-town gossip, the kind of local character anecdotes that inevitably circulate in remote communities like ours. But now I found myself wondering, what if that old hermit actually knew something useful? Something about the long-buried history of this place that could shed light on the dark forces I now found myself confronting. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. I glanced at my watch, 4:30 p.m. If I hurried, I could make it up to the North Tract and back before nightfall. Mind made up, I closed the incident report and shut down my computer. Grabbing my jacket and field pack, I locked up the station and jogged through the steadily increasing rain to my truck. The lingering dread from my morning encounter still coiled in my guts, but now it mingled with something else, the hot, sharp edge of determination. If there were answers to be found to this mystery, this evil, then I would find them. I had to. As I turned my truck off the main highway onto a rough Forest Service road, I sent up a silent plea to whoever or whatever might be listening. Let this hermit be home, and let him have something, anything to help me understand the darkness I had stumbled into. Because right now the only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't face it alone. The shadows of the whispering pines suddenly felt a lot more threatening, knowing what might be lurking within them. I pushed down the accelerator and sped off into the darkening woods. The truck bounced and rattled along the rutted dirt track, the thick overhanging boughs scraping across the roof like skeletal fingers. Rain lashed the windshield, the wipers no match for the torrent. The only landmark I had to go by was an old Forest Service map of the area from the 1950s that I had dug out of a filing cabinet. The faded contour line showed a small structure located along a tributary creek to the northwest, likely the last known whereabouts of my reclusive local history expert, assuming he was still out here at all and hadn't become food for scavengers years ago. I scanned the gloomy tree line for any sign of an access road or footpath branching off. The map had been sketchy on details. All I had to go on was a faint X penciled at the confluence of two squiggly blue lines deep in the forest. A cartographic, "Here there be monsters if ever I saw one." I felt a trickle of sweat worm its way between my shoulder blades despite the chill of the cab. My mind wandered again to the boy I had rescued just a few hours ago. He was safe now, but what if I hadn't been there? The guilt and horror of that alternate outcome didn't bear thinking about, but it was the look in that creature's eyes that kept replaying in my mind's eye. Such malevolence, such hunger. It was like staring into a dark mirror of the abyss and feeling it stare back, and I couldn't shake the certainty that this wasn't an isolated monster, but rather a single thread in a much larger and more terrible web. A sudden flash of red through the gray wall of rain snapped me out of my dark reverie. I stamped the brakes, peering through the deluge. There, a faded Scarlet Forest Service tag, barely visible under years of lichen growth, nailed to a half-rotted post. This had to be the old fire road marked on the map. I nosed the truck between the encroaching walls of dripping huckleberry and Devil's Club, wincing as brambles scraped along the doors. The track quickly deteriorated into a half-washed-out stream bed, choked with boulders and fallen logs. I gripped the wheel and gritted my teeth as the undercarriage bottomed out again and again with a screech of tortured metal. The headlights barely penetrated the murk, light swallowed by the curtains of rain and press of ancient trunks. Just as I was beginning to despair of the old track leading anywhere but my own eventual stranding, I rounded a hairpin bend and slammed on the brakes, almost putting the front bumper through a mildewed wall of corrugated tin roofing. Breathing hard, I rubbed condensation from the windshield and took stock of my new surroundings. I had fetched up in a small clearing hacked out of the old growth. Rusting heaps of logging equipment hulked in the thin light, a bulldozer, several skidders, a few battered trucks even older than mine. At the center of this mechanical boneyard crouched a ramshackle structure cobbled together from plywood, corrugated tin, and moss-softened timbers. Wood smoke curled from a crooked stovepipe jutting up from the patchwork roof. The building looked like the hermit crab of houses, a transient shelter improvised from whatever bits of lumber and cast-off equipment could be dragged into service. I cut the engine but stayed put for a long minute, breathing in the tinny petrichor scent of rain on rusting metal, trying to get a read on this strange waypoint. Something about the aura of the place set some deep atavistic instinct buzzing at the base of my skull. There was an air of desperate ingenuity here, but also melancholy, like the heavy stillness of a battlefield after the last echoes of gunfire fade. Steeling myself, I zipped my slicker up to my chin, pulled the hood tight, and climbed down into the sucking mud. I skirted a large yellow bulldozer, its treads long ago swallowed by encroaching bracken, and approached the shack. Up close, I could see the structure had been built around the rusting carcass of a forwarder, the makeshift walls erected between its massive wheels. As my boots crunched on eroded asphalt shingles serving as a doorstep, a sudden flurry of barking erupted from inside, accompanied by a gruff bellow. "Get your ass out here where I can see ya, and keep them hands where I can see 'em." I raised my open hands slowly, my heart battering my ribs. A painful moment later, an ancient-looking double-barrel shotgun poked out through a crack in the door, followed by a face like bark-crusted rawhide, nearly hidden beneath a wild tangle of beard and a sweat-stained Confederate flag bandana. "Who are you and what the hell you doing on my land?" the old man growled, one roomy blue eye glaring balefully at me over the rusted barrel. I swallowed hard, my mouth gone to dust. When I spoke, my voice cracked like a pubescent boy's. My name's Cyrus. I'm a ranger with the Park Service. Are you the one they call Gus? Gus Harkin? I was told you know a lot about the history of this area." "Ranger, huh?" The shotgun didn't waver, but something shifted infinitesimally in the old man's demeanor. "Ain't had one of you boys come round for a dog's age. Not since that business with them loggers way back." My pulse jumped. "The loggers? From the abandoned camp down south?" Gus's eyes narrowed. Might have heard a thing or two about that. Question is, why's a young buck like you interested in ancient history all of the sudden? I licked my lips, considering my next words very carefully. Because I think that ancient history isn't staying buried anymore. I think something evil has come out of that camp, and it's hunting again in the deep woods. For a long, brittle moment, the old man just stared at me, rain dripping from the brim of his oil-stained ball cap. Then, moving slowly, he lowered the shotgun. "Best come in out the wet, boy," he muttered. "Sounds like you and me got some talking to do." Inside Gus's cobbled-together cabin, the air was close and smoky from a small cast-iron wood stove. Every horizontal surface was piled with a mad clutter of rusting tools, dog-eared pulp novels, empty bean cans, and unidentifiable bits of scrap metal and wire. A threadbare wool blanket was tacked over the single small window, admitting only a wan gray light. In one corner, an ancient retriever lifted its grizzled muzzle from its paws and whined uncertainly at my entrance. Gus motioned me to a dented metal folding chair by the stove, as he leaned his shotgun in the corner and sat heavily on an upturned milk crate. Up close, I could see the lattice of scars covering his gnarled hands and the deep grooves around his mouth and eyes. This was a hard man, tempered by decades of solitude and struggle against the elements. "Don't get many visitors up this way. Suits me just fine," Gus said as he fished a pouch of tobacco and rolling papers from his breast pocket. "Too many folks these days got no respect for the old ways, the deep magic of the land. They think they can just take what they want from the forest, cut it, mine it, pave it over, and there won't be no consequences. Fools." He spat to the side. I leaned forward, lacing my fingers together to hide their trembling. "Gus, I think I saw one of those consequences today. Something not natural, not of this world. It tried to take a child. Would have if I hadn't." My voice faltered as the memory of those black, pitiless eyes swam before me again. Gus looked up sharply, his hands stilling on his cigarette. "The ghoul," he said flatly. It wasn't a question. I nodded mutely, a cold fist of dread clenching around my heart. Gus took a long drag on his cigarette, the ember painting his weathered face in hellish light and shadow. "They've been in these woods long before us, maybe long before the Indians, too. Old spirits, old demons, can't rightly say what they are, but they's tied to the land, and they don't care much for trespassers." He fixed me with a hard stare. "Them loggers back in a 22, they found that out the hard way. Got greedy, started felling the old sentinels, the guardian trees, stirred up something best left sleeping. Men started going missing, equipment sabotaged, strange tracks round the camp at night. Then the killing started." Gus trailed off, his rheumy eyes distant and haunted. I recalled the palpable aura of dread and misery hanging over the abandoned logging camp, the unnatural chill in the air, a nest of ancient evil roused to vengeance. Loggers pulled out after a month or two, none too soon either. Those that was left anyhow, Gus continued. Figured discretion were the better part of valor when your bunkmates start turning up dead with they chests hollowed out and they eyes missing. I shuddered, hugging my arms to my body as if I could physically hold the horror at bay. But why would these things, these ghouls, hunt a child? And why now, after all this time? Gus shook his head grimly. "Ghouls feed on fear, pain, the suffering of the innocent. Keeps 'em strong. As for the timin', well, they's patient. Play the long game. Might sleep for years 'tween feasts. But once they's woke, once they catch scent of new meat." He let the implication hang in the smoky air. My stomach roiled as I thought of all the families, the hikers and campers, who had passed through the forest this season, blithely unaware of the predators lurking in the deeps. How many of them had strayed too close to the ghouls' hunting grounds? How many would be dragged screaming into this waking nightmare? "There has to be a way to stop them," I said, my voice leaden with dread and determined in equal measure. "A way to kill them or seal them away again. There has to be." The old hermit leaned back, his face unreadable in the flickering shadows. Might be the knowing of it were lost long ago, but I reckon if any man got a chance of putting them demons back in they box, it's one who already faced 'em down and lived to tell it, one with fire in his belly and a true aim." His ancient eyes bored into mine. "Question is, that you, boy? Willin' to be the David to they Goliath? Willin' to make this here fight your own? I held his gaze as icy claws of terror and the hot thrum of resolve warred within me. This was insane. I was just one man, a 20-something park ranger who until today thought the scariest thing he'd face on the job was a disgruntled black bear. Who was I to confront this primordial evil? But then I remembered the abject terror on little Danny's face as the ghoul reached for him, the rattling screams of the hiker as the life was crushed from her body. I thought of all the other innocents who might fall victim to these monsters if no one took a stand. If I faltered now, their blood would be on my hands as surely as the ghoul's. I felt something deep inside me harden like a sword plunged into a blazing forge. When I spoke, the words came out low but unwavering. "Tell me what I need to do." Gus studied me for a moment longer, then nodded once, a ghost of a smile curling the edges of his beard. "Then listen close, Ranger. We got us some preparing to do. Reckon these here woods got theyselves a new guardian whether they wants one or not." He pushed to his feet with a creak of aging joints and crossed to a battered steamer trunk in the corner. Opening the lid, he began rummaging inside, muttering to himself. After a moment he turned back to me, a strange assortment of items cradled in his gnarled hands. Animal bones tied with sinew. Bundles of dried herbs that smelled of lightning and frost. A twisted dagger with symbols like dead spiders etched into the blade. Gus's eyes glinted with a fey light as he spread the arcane objects on a workbench, a general marshalling his arsenal for one last desperate campaign. Old Ephraim used to say there's two things in these woods to fear, the dark and the ranger. Time we taught them ghouls the truth of that. Time the ranger gave 'em something to fear back. He picked up the dagger, its edge gleaming like foxfire. I felt a wild, exultant terror sing through my veins, the primal awakening of the hunted-turned-hunter. I thought of the old Forest Service motto, carved in the lintel above the door of my ranger station, Custos Aramis Silvarum, Guardians of the Forest. It was time I lived up to those words, time I fulfilled my oath, whatever the cost. I stood, squaring my shoulders under the suddenly crushing weight of duty and destiny. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's go hunting." My name is Liam, and I've always been fascinated by the unknown. Growing up, I devoured books on cryptozoology, paranormal phenomena, and unsolved mysteries. But despite my keen interest, I never imagined I would have my own terrifying encounter with the inexplicable. It all started when my cousin Ethan, who was attending college in rural Vermont, asked me to house-sit for him while he moved to a place closer to campus. Ethan had recently inherited an old family home nestled deep in the woods. The property had been vacant for years and needed some work before he could sell it. "Just keep an eye on the place at night," Ethan told me over the phone, his voice tinged with unease. "There's something out there. I'm not sure what it is, but it's unnerving." I chuckled, thinking he was just trying to spook me. "Come on, you don't really believe in ghosts and monsters, do you? What could possibly be out there in the middle of nowhere?" "I'm serious, Liam," Ethan said, his tone grave. "Just be careful, okay? And call me if anything strange happens." Intrigued and a bit skeptical, I agreed to help. I packed up my old pickup truck and made the long drive out to the secluded property. As I wound my way along the narrow dirt road, tall pines pressing in on either side, an eerie feeling crept over me. It was as if the forest itself was watching me, sizing me up. I pushed the thought aside as I pulled up to the old house. It was a run-down two-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. Overgrown shrubs and weeds choked the yard. As I stepped out and looked around at the dense woods encroaching from all sides, a chill ran down my spine despite the warm summer air. I shook it off and busied myself unloading my things from the truck. But as I lugged my bags inside the musty interior, I couldn't shake the prickling unease on the back of my neck, as if unseen eyes were boring into me. After settling in and brewing a pot of strong coffee to stave off the weariness from the long drive, I set about exploring the old house. Faded photographs lined the walls, stern faces from the early 1900s staring out from tarnished frames. Antique furniture sat shrouded in dusty white sheets. The place had a palpable sense of history and secrets. As the sun dipped below the tree line, I cracked open a beer, pulled a chair onto the rickety front porch, and sat watching night fall over the forest. A chorus of cicadas swelled in the gloaming. Fireflies winked in the shadows between gnarled tree trunks. It would have been peaceful if not for the unshakable feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. I kept scanning the tree line, searching for any signs of movement, but there was only darkness and the sigh of wind through branches. Just as I was about to head inside, a flash of pale blue-white caught my eye near the edge of the forest, maybe 100 yards away. I squinted, trying to make it out in the deepening twilight. It looked almost like a person, but taller, thinner, and it seemed to emit a faint phosphorescent glow. A chill shivered through me despite the muggy air. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, the ghostly figure was gone. "I'm just tired," I muttered. "Seeing things." But an anxious knot had formed in my gut. I hurried inside, making sure to lock the front door behind me, and dug my flashlight out of my duffel bag. Part of me felt foolish, but I couldn't shake my unease. Sleep did not come easily that night. I tossed and turned on the lumpy old mattress, straining to listen past the groans and creaks of the settling house. At some point I must have drifted off because I awoke with a start, heart pounding, certain I had heard something moving around on the front porch. Trying to control my ragged breathing, I grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the front of the house. I eased open the door, wincing as it let out a loud creak, and stepped out into the muggy night. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the porch and out into the overgrown yard. Clumps of weeds cast eerie, elongated shadows, but I didn't see any sign of an intruder. Just as I was about to go back inside, a flicker of movement at the tree line snagged my attention. I directed my light in that direction and felt my blood turn to ice. There, at the edge of the woods, stood a figure, tall and thin with long, spindly limbs. Its skin shone with a pale, sickly luminescence in the flashlight beam, but it was the face that filled me with stomach-knotting dread, or rather the lack of one. Where facial features should have been, there was only smooth, featureless, bluish white. I must have made some sort of strangled noise, because the thing swiveled its head in my direction with a quick, jerky motion. I stood paralyzed, heart hammering against my ribcage. For a moment I felt the weight of its eyeless gaze on me. Then it turned and slipped silently back into the shadows of the forest. The darkness swallowed it up like ink. I don't remember running back inside the house and slamming the door behind me. But suddenly I was leaning against it, gasping for breath, a cold sweat slicking my skin. My mind reeled, trying to process what I had just seen. Was it some kind of prank? A trespasser in an eerily convincing costume? Deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The silent, predatory grace with which it had moved, the unnatural glow of its skin, that was something else entirely, something that didn't belong in the rational world. With shaking hands, I dug my phone out of my pocket and called Ethan. The line rang and rang. Finally, his voicemail picked up. "Ethan, it's Liam," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I saw something, out by the woods. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't natural. Call me back as soon as you can." I ended the call and sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I sat like that for a long time, listening to the machines in the walls grind and hum, jumping at every creak. Sleep was out of the question. I spent the rest of the night in an agitated daze, pacing from window to window, periodically shining my light out at the tree line. But I saw no further sign of the entity. By the time tendrils of misty light began to creep across the forest floor, heralding dawn's approach, I was strung out and jittery from lack of sleep and too much caffeine. I kept replaying the encounter in my head. I knew with grim certainty that whatever I had seen, it was only the beginning. A sense of dread turned my stomach leaden. What had I gotten myself into by agreeing to stay out here? What horrors lay in wait, concealed in the primeval depths of the forest? As I watched the woods brighten with the pale light of an overcast dawn, I knew one thing for sure. My perception of the world had just been irrevocably shattered. Everything I thought I knew had been called into question. The only thing I could do was try to survive the mind-bending revelations that I sensed were still to come. I spent the day in a daze, jumping at small noises, checking and rechecking the locks. I called Ethan incessantly, but only reached his voicemail. A growing unease knotted my stomach. As dusk approached, the air grew heavy and still. An eerie greenish light suffused the forest, making the shadows appear even deeper. I stood on the porch, scanning the tree line, a prickling sensation creeping up the back of my neck. Then I heard it, a lone coyote howling in the distance. The mournful sound raised goosebumps on my arms, but it was what came next that chilled me to my core. From the woods rose a chorus of answering howls, but they didn't sound like any coyotes I had ever heard. The howls rose and fell in a discordant, almost melodic cacophony that set my teeth on edge. It sounded like a wordless chant, ancient and unknowable. As the unearthly howling reached a fever pitch, pale shapes began to emerge from the forest, their luminous skin standing out starkly against the gathering gloom. More and more of the figures appeared, seeming to coalesce out of the darkness between the trees. Soon a dozen or more of the eerie entities stood at the edge of the yard, swaying slightly. Even from a distance I could feel the weight of their eyeless gazes on me. A shudder racked my body. Slowly moving in uncanny unison, they began to advance across the overgrown yard. Their long, spindly limbs bent at unnatural angles as they glided through the knee-high weeds. Panic rising in my throat, I backed toward the door, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the nightmarish sight. My heart hammered in my chest as they drew closer, their blank faces aimed in my direction. Suddenly, a pair of headlights cut through the murk. Ethan's old Ford pickup came roaring up the driveway in a spray of gravel. The approaching creatures froze, their heads swiveling toward the new arrival. Ethan leaped from the cab, a flare gun clutched in one hand. "Liam, get inside," he shouted. I didn't hesitate. I darted through the doorway as Ethan aimed the flare gun at the closest creature and pulled the trigger. A brilliant red flare streaked across the yard, casting writhing shadows. It struck the being square in its smooth, featureless face. The creature let out a high, thin shriek that made my skin crawl. It staggered backwards, clawing at its face as cobweb-like strands of luminous matter streamed away from the impact point. The other entities turned as one to face Ethan. He fumbled to reload the flare gun with shaking hands. Just then, an unearthly reverberation shook the ground, rattling the windows. The creatures froze, then, in eerie unison, turned back toward the forest. They began to retreat, their movements synchronized as if controlled by a single mind. As they reached the tree line, they seemed to unravel, their forms dissipating into drifting strands of phosphorescence that were quickly swallowed up by the night. Ethan stood motionless, flare gun still aimed at the spot where the creatures had vanished. After a long moment, he turned and hurried up the steps and into the house, slamming and locking the door behind him. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What were those things?" Ethan shook his head, his face ashen in the harsh porch light. "I don't know," he said, "but they've been coming around more and more, every night like they're drawn to this place." He met my gaze, his eyes haunted. "We need to get out of here, Liam. Whatever those things are, I don't think they're done with us yet." Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table, a bottle of whiskey between us. He took a long pull straight from the bottle before slamming it back down, sloshing amber liquid onto the scratched formica. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Start from the beginning. What do you know about those entities?" Ethan ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Not much," he admitted. "They started showing up a few weeks after I moved in. At first it was just glimpses, a flash of something pale at the tree line, a flicker of movement in the shadows. But then they got bolder." He took another swig of whiskey, grimacing as it went down. "They started coming into the yard at night, just standing there watching the house, like they were waiting for something." A chill skittered down my spine. "Waiting for what?" Ethan shrugged helplessly. "I don't know, but I started doing some research trying to figure out if there was any history of strange sightings in this area, and I found something." He got up and retrieved a battered leather-bound journal from his duffel bag. He placed it on the table and opened it to a bookmarked page. "This is my great-grandfather's journal," he said. "He lived in this house back in the 1920s, and he wrote about seeing the same creatures." I leaned forward, scanning the faded, spidery handwriting. A chill settled in my gut as I read the words. "They come with the mist, gliding from the depths of the forest. Their skin glows with an unholy light. They gather in the yard, their eyeless faces turned toward the house, as if seeking something within. I fear they are not of this earth, but rather beings from some abyssal realm beyond the veil. I looked up at Ethan, my heart pounding. What do you think they are? I asked hoarsely. He shook his head. I don't know for sure, but I have a theory. He flipped to another page in the journal and pointed to a passage. There are old legends in these parts, whispered tales of a race of beings that predates humanity. They are said to dwell in the spaces between worlds, in the shadows beyond the periphery of our perception. The native tribes called them the Watchers, and believed they had the power to steal souls. I felt lightheaded, my breath coming short. You think that's what they're here for? Our souls? Ethan met my gaze, his eyes haunted. I think they're drawn to something, some energy or essence that certain people possess, and they won't stop until they get it. Just then, a bone-chilling shriek split the night, raising every hair on my body. It sounded close. Too close. Heart in my throat, I bolted to the window. In the pale moonlight, I could see dozens of luminous figures emerging from the forest. They moved with uncanny synchronicity, their long limbs bent at unnatural angles. But it was what I saw at the rear of their procession that turned my blood to ice. Towering over the other entities was a creature of nightmare. It was vaguely humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. Limbs too long, body too gaunt. And its head, dear God, its head. A crown of twisting antlers sprouted from its elongated skull, silhouetted against the moon like a thorny halo. As I watched in mute horror, the skeletal behemoth raised its arms. The lesser creatures stopped in their tracks, heads swiveling toward the house in uncanny unison. It's the Watcher King, Ethan whispered from behind me, his voice strangled with terror. The Lord of the Watchers come to claim his tribute. The antlered abomination pointed one long bony finger at the house, at us, and the gathered horde surged forward through the tangled weeds, their blank faces aimed hungrily at the windows. The creatures converged on the house with shocking speed, their luminous bodies swarming over the yard like spectral army ants. The air shook with the discordant keening of their alien voices, a sound that threatened to shred my sanity. We need to barricade the doors, Ethan shouted over the unearthly din. We sprang into action, dragging furniture and stacking it against the doors. Barely a moment after we wedged the last chair under the back doorknob, a heavy thump shook the door in its frame. The creatures were trying to force their way inside. Eerie, wraith-like forms appeared at the windows, their blank faces pressed against the glass. Long-fingered hands scrabbled at the frames, seeking any weakness, any gap they could exploit. Ethan and I fell back to the center of the house, clutching improvised weapons, a flashlight, a cast-iron skillet. Sweat trickled down my face as I stared wide-eyed at the besieged doors and windows. How long could mere wood and glass hold back the nightmarish horde? In the face of that relentless otherworldly siege, time lost all meaning. It felt like an eternity, but it could have been mere minutes. The barricaded doors shuddered under the inhuman strength of the creatures, hinges and lintels creaking ominously. The windows rattled in their frames as those long, grasping fingers probed for any weakness. Suddenly, a crash from the back of the house made us both jump. One of the creatures had broken through a window. I could hear the slither of its luminous body as it writhed through the opening. "Upstairs!" Ethan cried. "We'll bottleneck them on the staircase." We raced up the narrow steps, taking them 2 and 3 at a time. No sooner had we reached the top landing than the first creature crested the bottom step, its eyeless face angled upward as if scenting our fear. Ethan swung the flashlight like a club, catching the entity hard across its upper body. It tumbled backwards, tangling with the 2 creatures behind it. They fell in a writhing heap of glowing limbs. But more came, scrambling over their fallen brethren, massing on the staircase. Their combined weight made the old wood groan alarmingly. The realization hit me like an icy fist. We were trapped. There would be no escape from the second floor. We fell back to the furthest room, slamming and locking the flimsy door. We dragged an old wardrobe in front of it, but I knew it was a futile gesture. It was only a matter of time before they broke through, and then there would be nowhere left to run. Through the small window, I could see the Watcher King standing in the yard, its body swaying back and forth like a macabre metronome. The lesser creatures swarmed around it, their movements synchronized to its rhythm. It was as if they were all extensions of its unholy will. Ethan sagged against the wall, his face ashen. "It's over," he said hoarsely. "We can't fight them, Liam. They won't stop until they have what they came for." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died in my throat. Deep down, I knew he was right. We were outmatched by forces we couldn't begin to comprehend, let alone combat. Just then, the door shuddered as several heavy blows rained down upon it. The creatures were trying to break through. The wardrobe jutted across the floor, its heavy bulk no match for their preternatural strength. Ethan met my gaze, a grim resignation in his eyes. "If we're going down, we go down fighting." He hefted the flashlight in a white-knuckle grip. I raised the cast-iron skillet with shaking hands, my mind spinning with the sheer unreality of it all. Was this really how it would end? Beaten and devoured by entities from beyond the veil, our bodies and souls consumed for some unknowable purpose? The door gave way with a splintering crash. The wardrobe toppled over as the first creature forced its way into the room, closely followed by two more. Their featureless faces swung towards us, their eyeless gazes boring into us with palpable hunger. And then they lunged, their grasping hands outstretched, their keening cries shivering the air. We swung our makeshift weapons, the heavy impact shuddering up our arms. But it was like fighting a tide of luminous flesh. For each one we struck down, two more surged forward to take its place. Their hands clawed at us, their touch icy and draining. I felt my strength ebbing, my vision narrowing to a tunnel. Distantly, I heard Ethan cry out in pain or fear. The flashlight spun from his grip, its beam cutting crazily across the writhing melee. Then the Watcher King appeared in the doorway, its antlered head brushing the frame, its form filling the space with a blackness that was deeper than mere shadow. It extended one long-fingered hand, reaching out to us. And everything went dark. Consciousness returned slowly, in jagged fragments. The first thing I became aware of was the cold, a bone-deep, leeching chill that seemed to radiate from the very air around me. I opened my eyes, blinking repeatedly, until my surroundings swam into focus. I was lying on a hard, uneven surface, staring up at a ceiling that was lost in shadows. Towering pillars of rough-hewn stone marched off into the gloom, supporting a vaulted roof that was too distant to make out. With growing trepidation, I levered myself upright. My body felt strange, disconnected, as if it belonged to someone else. I looked down at myself and had to stifle a scream. My skin glowed with the same eerie luminescence as the Watchers. Memories crashed over me, the siege, the fight in the upstairs room, the appearance of the Watcher King. The sheer alien wrongness of my current situation threatened to overwhelm me, to send me spiraling into gibbering panic. I reeled to my feet, fighting down the urge to vomit. The chamber was vast, sprawling off into the shadows in all directions. I couldn't see any walls or other boundaries. The air had a stagnant, unlived-in quality, as if I was standing in a tomb. "Ethan?" I called out, my voice cracking. The name echoed back to me from the distant reaches of the chamber, mocking in its loneliness. There was no response. I was alone, or was I? I had the uncanny sensation of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking my every move. Fighting down my fear, I began to explore my prison. The floor was some kind of stone, rough and uneven beneath my bare feet. Patches of dank moisture glistened here and there, as if the rock itself was weeping. I wandered for what felt like hours, my sense of time distorted by the unchanging gloom. But no matter how far I walked, I never seemed to reach the walls of the chamber. It was as if space itself was warped in this nightmarish place. Finally, exhausted and soul-weary, I sank to the ground. Despair crashed over me like a black wave. I was trapped, changed in some fundamental way, torn from everything I knew and loved. What did the Watchers want with me? What had they done to me, to Ethan? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, a chill wind sighed through the chamber. I lifted my head, every muscle tensing. There, at the limit of my vision, a figure appeared. It was tall and skeletally gaunt, its body clad in drifting rags the color of twilight. A rack of antlers branched from its elongated skull, silhouetted against the gloom like the bars of a stark black cage. The Watcher King. It glided toward me, its movements smooth and inexorable. I scrambled backwards on all fours, my heart hammering against my ribs. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The entity loomed over me, its form seeming to drink in the feeble light. When it spoke, its voice was the creak of ancient tombs, the whisper of things long dead and buried. "Welcome, child," it said. "Welcome to the space between worlds, to the realm of the Watchers." I tried to form words, but all that emerged was a strangled whimper. The Watcher King cocked its head to one side, as if amused by my terror. "You have been chosen," it continued, "chosen to join our ranks, to partake in the great vigil. Your old life is over. Now you will watch with us, forever." The Watcher King's words echoed in my mind, tolling like the bells of some unspeakable chapel. Chosen, partake in the vigil, forever. "What have you done to me?" I managed to rasp out, my voice sounding thin and pitiful in the immensity of the chamber. The entity regarded me with those fathomless pits where eyes should have been. "We have begun your transformation," it said. "Your crude matter is being reshaped, refined to better suit our purposes." It extended one long-fingered hand, the digits stiff and sharp as antique cutlery. "Already you have taken on the luminance. Soon your mind will expand to encompass vistas beyond the meager scope of mortal ken. You will see the true shape of creation and your place within it." I looked down at my hands, sickened by the eldritch glow suffusing my flesh. The implications of the creature's words crashed over me like a gelid wave. It was changing me, warping my very essence to make me like them, like the Watchers. Suddenly a searing pain lanced through my temples. I cried out, doubling over, clutching my head. It felt like something was growing inside my skull, pressing against the confines of bone. As the pain reached a crescendo, my vision flickered and warped. For a dizzying instant, I perceived the chamber differently. The rough stone walls seemed to flatten and peel away, revealing churning gulfs of utter blackness shot through with pulsing veins of sickly radiance. I glimpsed immense shapes moving in that Stygian abyss, vast and incomprehensible. Then, as quickly as it had come, the pain and the hellish vision receded. I found myself on my hands and knees, gasping, my body slick with icy sweat. "You see," the Watcher King hissed, "already your sight grows keener. Soon you will behold the true nature of the spaces between." "I don't want this," I screamed. "I don't want to be one of you. Please let me go back." The Watcher King made a sound that might have been laughter, a dry rustle like the crumbling of ancient parchment. "There is no going back, child. The process has begun. It cannot be undone." I reeled to my feet, backing away, shaking my head in futile denial. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare, some fevered delirium. But deep in the core of my being, I knew it was all too real. The Watcher King advanced, its form seeming to swell and darken, filling my vision. "Do not fight it," it whispered. "Embrace the change. Embrace your destiny." I felt a pressure on my mind, a crushing weight that threatened to smother all thought, all individuality. I could feel myself slipping away, my memories and identity becoming lost in a rising tide of alien instincts and urges. I squeezed my eyes shut, hot tears leaking from beneath the lids. I clung to thoughts of my old life, of the people I loved, like a drowning man clutching at floating debris. But those images were growing dimmer, more distant, drowned out by the seething static filling my mind. Just as I teetered on the brink of surrender, a voice cut through the tumult, a familiar voice desperately calling my name. "Ethan!" My eyes snapped open. There at the edge of the chamber I saw him. He was on his hands and knees, his skin suffused with the same uncanny luminance as mine. But his eyes were still human, wide and terrified and pleading. "Liam," he cried, "fight it, don't let them take you." The sight of him, the sound of his voice, was like a life-preserver thrown to a man drowning in dark waters. I latched onto it, using it to pull myself back from the edge of the abyss yawning within me. The Watcher King hissed, a sound of frustration and anger. It lashed out with one spidery hand, but I ducked beneath the blow and lunged past it, desperately stumbling toward Ethan. He reached out to me, his hand trembling. Our fingers met, clasped, and in that moment of connection, that physical anchor to my humanity, I felt a surging warmth blossom in my chest. It spread through my body, beating back the icy numbness of the transformation. Hand in hand, Ethan and I ran, plunging headlong into the cloying shadows at the edge of the chamber. Behind us, the Watcher King shrieked, a sound of rage and disbelief. We ran, even as the darkness thickened around us, even as unseen shapes gibbered and clutched. We ran, clinging to each other, to the last trailing threads of our human selves. And when the darkness finally parted, when we staggered out into a night that was blessedly familiar, the night of our own world, we collapsed into each other's arms, weeping with relief and residual terror. We had escaped the belly of the beast, but we would forever bear the scars. The memory of that place, of the vast and alien presence lurking behind the tattered veil of reality, would haunt us for the rest of our days. And deep within, I could still feel it, the cold glow of the transformation, waiting to reignite, waiting to finish what had been begun. I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that the Watchers weren't done with us. One day they would call us back to the spaces between, and on that day there would be no escape. It's been 5 years since that nightmarish ordeal in the Vermont woods. 5 years of jumping at shadows, of waking in the night drenched in icy sweat, my mind echoing with the ghostly keening of the Watchers. Ethan and I don't talk about it much. What is there to say? We both bear the invisible scars, the indelible mark of our brush with the unknowable. We've tried to move on, to build some semblance of a normal life, but it's hard when you know what lurks beneath the skin of the world. We've thrown ourselves into research, scouring arcane texts and obscure folklore for any scrap of knowledge about the entities that almost claimed us, but there's precious little to be found. It's as if the Watchers exist in the blind spots of reality, visible only from the corner of the eye. Sometimes, in the depths of the night, I find myself staring at my hands, half expecting to see that eerie luminance kindling beneath my skin. Ethan confessed to me once, in a voice heavy with dread, that he sometimes feels a strange pulling sensation in his mind, an inexorable tug toward vast and dark spaces that have no name. We both know what it means. The change the Watcher King began in us isn't over. It's only dormant, waiting for the right moment to flare back into terrible life. We're marked, he and I, marked for a fate that we can't begin to fathom. But we've made a pact, Ethan and I. When the call comes, when we feel ourselves slipping away, we won't let it take us without a fight. We'll cling to our humanity, to each other, with every ounce of strength we possess. And if that fails, if we feel ourselves succumbing, well, we've made arrangements, a final escape, a last resort to ensure we don't become the very thing we dread. But I pray it never comes to that. I pray that somehow we'll find a way to break the hold the Watchers have on us, to banish the creeping darkness that threatens to consume us from within. Until then, we carry on, one day at a time, one foot in front of the other, but always, always with an eye cast warily toward the shadows, because we know now, with a certainty that chills us to the marrow, that we are never truly alone. The spaces between are always there, pressing against the fragile membrane of our reality, and the Watchers are waiting for us, their chosen ones, to rejoin the vigil in the cold and abyssal dark, where no light can reach and no hope can bloom. My name is Bradley Cooper, and I'm a 28-year-old former Marine living in Texas. This story takes place back in 2019, when I had just been discharged from the service. One of the first things I did upon returning home was visit my childhood friend Jacob Powell. We met up at his place and caught up on lost time. Jacob mentioned that there had been a lot of talk recently about unknown creatures roaming the forests, things like Bigfoot and even skinwalkers. But the creature that really sent a chill down my spine was one I had never heard of before, the Wendigo. Curious, I asked Jacob to tell me more about this Wendigo. He explained that according to legend, if you went deep into the woods and said Wendigo 3 times, you would summon the most terrifying creature imaginable. I laughed it off at first, thinking he was just trying to spook me, but Jacob insisted it was real. To prove his point, he suggested we head out to an old, secluded dock that he and an ex-girlfriend used to go to when they wanted to get away. It was near the Alabama state line, surrounded by dense forest. I figured why not? It would be nice to get out into nature after being cooped up on military bases for so long. So I grabbed my gun, old habits die hard, and we headed out. The dock was in even worse shape than Jacob had described. It looked like it hadn't been maintained in years, with rotting boards and overgrown weeds everywhere. But the seclusion and stillness was oddly peaceful. We sat with our legs dangling over the edge, sipping beers and reminiscing. After about a half hour, Jacob brought up the Wendigo again. There was an intense look in his eye as he described the gaunt, pale creature, barely more than skin and bones, but with unnatural speed and strength. It was said to have an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Fueled by beer and bravado, I told Jacob I didn't believe in his silly legend. He grinned and dared me to put my money where my mouth was. I agreed, and we set off into the woods to find a suitable spot for the summoning. The ground was still saturated from recent heavy rains as we pushed deeper into the forest. The air grew heavy and still, and the only sound was the occasional gust of wind through the treetops. After about 20 minutes of walking, Jacob announced that this was far enough. We stood in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. Jacob looked at me expectantly. Sighing, I said the word out loud, "Wendigo." Nothing happened. Grinning, I said it twice more, feeling a little foolish. For a moment, the only sound was our breathing. Then a branch snapped loudly in the distance. We both flinched and peered into the undergrowth. I took a step forward, my hand drifting towards my concealed pistol. More snapping twigs, and then suddenly, 3 coyotes burst out onto the path in front of us. They kept running without even glancing our way. Jacob and I burst out laughing, the tension broken. I clapped him on the shoulder, ribbing him about his ridiculous story. But then I noticed how rigidly he was standing, staring back the way we had come. "Did you hear that?" he asked in a strained whisper. I strained my ears, but all I could hear was the wind. And then I felt it, a strange pressure change, like the air was suddenly heavier. The back of my neck prickled. A loud groan reverberated through the forest, the sound of strained wood. I scanned the trees around us, and my eyes widened as I spotted a massive pine teetering at a dangerous angle. "Run!" I bellowed, shoving Jacob forwards. We sprinted down the narrow path, recklessly crashing through the undergrowth. Behind us, an ear-splitting crack rang out as the huge tree toppled. I risked a glance over my shoulder and felt a surge of adrenaline as I saw it falling directly towards us. I tackled Jacob roughly, and we both hit the muddy ground hard, knocking the wind out of our lungs. A split second later, the pine crashed down right where we had been standing, the force of the impact shaking the earth. Panting, I hauled Jacob to his feet. "Come on, we have to move," I urged. Jacob nodded dazedly, still in shock. I practically dragged him along the path, my senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made me flinch. As we ran, a familiar voice suddenly called out from behind us, "Jacob, Jacob, come quick." We both froze. It sounded exactly like Olivia, Jacob's younger sister. Jacob made a choked noise and tried to turn back. I grabbed him roughly. "Jacob, look at me," I shouted. "That is not Olivia. It can't be her." But he struggled against my grip, his eyes wild. Just then, another pine gave an ominous creak. I swore and yanked Jacob to the ground again as the second tree fell, missing us by inches. "Listen to me," I hissed, my face inches from his. "Whatever that thing is, it's trying to lure you. Olivia is not here. We need to go, now." Finally, I saw a flicker of understanding in Jacob's eyes. He nodded shakily. I hauled him up again and we took off, running faster than I thought possible. My lungs and legs were burning, but pure adrenaline kept me going. Finally, I spotted the trailhead up ahead. As we neared the edge of the woods, a wave of relief washed over me, but it was short-lived, because standing between us and safety was the most horrific thing I had ever seen. It was vaguely humanoid, but grotesquely elongated and emaciated, with paper-white skin stretched tight over jutting bones. Its arms and legs were far too long and skinny, bent at unnatural angles. But worst of all were its eyes, a shocking, vibrant blue that seemed to glow from within sunken sockets. The thing moved towards us with a jerky, unnatural gait, far faster than should have been possible for a creature that looked so frail. A scream built in my throat, but I couldn't force it past the knot of terror. Jacob was frozen beside me, making little whimpering noises. I had never seen him so scared. Hell, I had never been so scared myself, even after 2 tours in Afghanistan. The creature opened its mouth, revealing horrifically sharp teeth. "Mine," it hissed, its voice like cracking ice. "Hungry." Some primal instinct kicked in, and I yanked my pistol from my waistband, bringing it up and squeezing the trigger in one smooth motion. The shot rang out deafeningly loud in the stillness of the forest. I saw the bullet strike the creature dead center in its chest and pass right through it, splintering bark from the tree behind it. The thing let out a hideous shriek that didn't sound remotely human. I didn't wait to see if it was hurt. "Run!" I screamed at Jacob, giving him a hard shove towards the trailhead as I fired 2 more useless shots at the creature. We ran like we had never run before, crashing through undergrowth and leaping over fallen trees. I could hear the thing pursuing us, letting out savage snarls and otherworldly shrieks. I prayed it couldn't leave the forest, that there was still some truth to the old legends. After what felt like years, we finally burst out of the tree line and sprinted to Jacob's car. We leapt in and peeled out in a spray of gravel before we even had our doors fully shut. I craned around to look behind us, my heart in my throat, but there was no sign of the creature. We drove in stunned silence for 20 minutes before Jacob pulled over to the side of the road. We both sat there shaking, trying to process what had just happened. "What the hell was that thing?" Jacob finally asked. His voice sounded small and lost. I just shook my head. I had no answers, no explanations. All I knew was that we had seen something that couldn't be real. But the mind-numbing terror I still felt was undeniable. In the following weeks, I threw myself into researching the Wendigo legend, desperate to make some sense of our experience. I pored over old books and online forums, but while the myth was widespread, actual first-hand accounts were practically non-existent. It seemed Jacob and I were members of a very small, very unfortunate club. Life went on, as it tends to do. Jacob and I drifted apart, the shared trauma driving a wedge between us rather than bringing us closer. I think we both served as a reminder of that awful day, of the overwhelming fear and the shattering of our worldview. I tried to push it to the back of my mind, to convince myself it had just been a figment of my imagination. But deep down I knew better. I had seen true evil that day, looked it right in its unnaturally blue eyes, and I knew it was still out there somewhere waiting. So now I'm putting my story out there, as a warning. If you ever find yourself deep in the woods and hear a little voice telling you to call out to the Wendigo, don't. No matter how silly it may seem, no matter how much you don't believe. Because if you do, it will answer. And there are some things in this world that we are not meant to summon. The nightmares started shortly after our encounter with the Wendigo. Night after night, I found myself back in those woods, running for my life from a gaunt, pale horror that I could never quite escape. I would wake up drenched in cold sweat, my heart pounding out of my chest. During the day, I was constantly on edge. Every unexpected noise made me flinch. Every shadow in my peripheral vision seemed to move with unnatural intent. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, stalked by something just beyond my field of view. I tried to self-medicate with alcohol, hoping to numb the fear and blur the memories, but all it did was make the nightmares more vivid, more tangible. I would wake up screaming, convinced that bony, elongated fingers had been reaching for my throat. My work and personal life began to suffer. I was perpetually exhausted from lack of sleep and on edge from the constant anxiety. I snapped at coworkers and friends over the smallest things. I could see the concern and confusion in their eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Who would believe me? The only person I felt I could talk to was Jacob, but he had become distant, avoiding my calls and texts. In desperation, I drove out to his house one evening, determined to force him to talk to me. I needed to know I wasn't alone in this. But when I got there, the house was dark and Jacob's car was gone. I sat on his porch for hours, alternating between anger and despair. He was the only other person on this planet who could understand what I was going through, and he had abandoned me. In the weeks that followed, my fixation on the Wendigo grew into a full-blown obsession. If I couldn't escape it, then I would try to understand it. I quit my job and spent my days scouring the internet and dusty library tomes for any scrap of information. Most of what I found was folklore and conjecture, tall tales passed down through generations. The Wendigo was said to be a malevolent spirit that possessed people, driving them to insatiable cannibalistic hunger. Other stories described it as a physical creature, a gaunt monster with a heart of ice that stalked the winter forests. But I had seen the truth. The Wendigo was both and neither of these things, a being that defied rational explanation, that blurred the line between physical and spiritual. It was a manifestation of the darkest depths of the human psyche, of the primal fear and hunger that lurk in all of us. I began to wonder if Jacob and I had truly summoned it that day, or if it had already been with us, inside us, just waiting for an invitation to emerge. The thought made me shudder, but I couldn't shake it. Desperate for answers, I sought out people online who claimed to have had similar experiences. Most were obviously frauds or fiction, but a few rings true, sharing details that were too specific, too visceral to be made up. I reached out to them, eager to compare notes. One man in particular seemed to know more than the others. His name was Liam, and he hinted that he had found a way to confront the Wendigo, to assert control over it. At first, I assumed he was just another crackpot, but as we talked more, I became convinced that he was telling the truth. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet Liam at a remote cabin in the heart of the very same forest where Jacob and I had encountered the Wendigo. As I drove down the dirt road, my hands shook on the wheel. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to turn back, but I felt compelled to see this through. Liam was waiting for me on the cabin's porch, a tall, gaunt figure that made my skin crawl. As I got closer, I realized with a shock that his eyes were the exact same piercing blue as the creature's. "You came," he said simply, his voice raspy and thin. "Good. It's time to face your fear." I followed him into the woods with leaden feet, my heart racing. The trees seemed to close in around us, blocking out the sun. The air grew heavy and oppressive, just like it had that fateful day. Finally, we reached a small clearing. Liam turned to me, his blue eyes glinting. "Call to it," he commanded. "Summon the Wendigo." I balked, shaking my head frantically, but Liam's gaze was unwavering, almost hypnotic. Before I knew what I was doing, I heard myself whisper "Wendigo" once, twice, 3 times. The forest went deathly silent, and then I heard it, that same icy, cracking voice that had haunted my dreams. "Hungry," it hissed from the shadows. "So hungry." Liam smiled, a horrible skeletal grin. And then, to my horror, he began to change. His limbs elongated, his skin stretched tight over jutting bones. In moments, the Wendigo stood before me, vibrant blue eyes boring into my soul. I stumbled back, fumbling for the pistol at my hip. But Liam, no, the Wendigo, was on me in an instant, inhumanly fast. Bony fingers wrapped around my throat, cutting off my scream. "Don't fight it," the creature hissed in Liam's voice. "Embrace the hunger. Become one with it, as I have." Black spots swam in my vision as I struggled for air. In that moment, I understood. Liam hadn't learned to control the Wendigo. He had given himself to it, let it consume him body and soul. And now it wanted me too. With the last of my strength, I brought my pistol up under the creature's chin and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening at such close range. For a second, those burning blue eyes widened in shock. Then the creature let out an ungodly shriek and threw me aside. I hit the ground hard, gasping for breath. Through blurred vision, I saw the Wendigo staggering black ichor spurting from the ruin of its jaw. It fixed me with a look of pure hatred before turning and fleeing into the forest, leaving a trail of foul black blood. I don't know how long I lay there in the dirt before I found the strength to pick myself up. The forest was silent once again, but the air felt lighter somehow, like a heavy presence had lifted. I knew in my bones that the Wendigo was gone, truly gone this time. In the years since, I've tried to put that chapter of my life behind me. I eventually tracked down Jacob, and over many difficult conversations, and even more tears, we began to heal together. We will always carry the scars of what we experienced, but we no longer let it define us. I still dream of the Wendigo sometimes. I see those glowing blue eyes in the dark and feel the phantom grip of bony fingers around my throat. But now I know that it can be beaten, that even the darkest, most primal fears can be faced and overcome. So that is my story for what it's worth. A warning, a confession, and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. We live in a world of unimaginable horrors, but also of unimaginable strength. And as long as we hold on to that strength, even the Wendigo can be defeated. The cold Maine wind whistled through the bare branches outside my dorm room window, a sound I'd grown accustomed to since starting college in Farmington. It was early November, and the first snow had already blanketed the campus, transforming it into a picturesque winter wonderland. But for me, the snow brought more than just scenic views. It stirred memories of stories passed down through generations, tales that sent shivers down my spine despite the warmth of my room. I'm River, named after the flowing waters that have shaped the land and lives of my people for centuries. At 19, I was in my sophomore year at the University of Maine at Farmington, studying environmental science. My Penobscot and Abenaki heritage ran as deep as the rivers I was named for, a constant undercurrent in my life that both grounded and unsettled me. Growing up, I spent countless hours with my grandfather, listening to his stories by the flickering light of a campfire. He was a repository of our people's history and lore, his weathered face a map of wisdom earned through years of living in harmony with the land. But it was his cautionary tales that left the deepest impression, especially his warnings about the Wendigo. "River," he'd say, his voice low and serious. "Our ancestors knew the dangers that lurk in the shadows of the forest. The Wendigo is not just a monster from children's stories. It's a manifestation of greed, isolation, and the darkest parts of the human spirit. Never forget that the line between man and monster can be terrifyingly thin." I'd nod solemnly, trying to hide the goosebumps that rose on my arms. Part of me wanted to dismiss these stories as superstition, a relic of a time before science could explain the world around us. But another part, a deeper, more instinctual part, couldn't shake the feeling that there was truth in his words. As I sat at my desk attempting to focus on an ecology textbook, my mind wandered to the friends I'd made since coming to college. There was Ian, my roommate, a lanky computer science major with a dry wit and a penchant for late-night coding sessions. Zoe, an art student whose vibrant paintings brought color to our otherwise drab dorm walls. And Kai, a fellow environmental science student whose passion for conservation matched my own. They were good friends, but there was always a part of me I held back. How could I explain the weight of generations of tradition I carried? The stories that were more than just stories, the connection to the land that ran bone deep. It wasn't something I could easily put into words, especially not in the sterile, academic environment of a college campus. A knock at my door jolted me from my reverie. "Hey, River," Ian called through the door. "We're thinking of heading down to the river tonight. You in?" I hesitated for a moment. The sandy river had become our go-to spot for unwinding, a place where we could escape the pressures of classes and exams. We'd build small fires, share a few drinks, and talk about everything and nothing until the early hours of the morning. It was a ritual that had become comforting in its familiarity. But as I looked out at the snow-covered ground, a flicker of unease passed through me. The stories my grandfather told seemed to whisper in the back of my mind, a warning carried on the chill wind. I shook my head, trying to dispel the feeling. This was ridiculous. We'd been to the river countless times before. What could possibly be different about tonight? "Yeah, I'm in," I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. "Give me a few minutes to grab some stuff." As I gathered supplies, extra layers, a flashlight, my trusty lighter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just nerves or the weather. There was a tension in the air like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I zipped up my backpack and took a deep breath. "Get it together, River," I muttered to myself. "It's just another night by the river, nothing to worry about." But as I opened the door to join my friends, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. Something was different about tonight. I just didn't know what, or how much it would change everything. The trek down to the sandy river was familiar, but the blanket of snow transformed the landscape into something alien and foreboding. Our breath formed misty clouds in the frigid air as we made our way through the silent woods. Ian led the way, his enthusiasm seemingly unaffected by the cold. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Zoe said, her voice muffled by a thick scarf. "It's freezing out here." Kai chuckled. "That's what makes it an adventure, right?" I remained quiet, my senses on high alert. Every snap of a twig under our feet, every rustle of wind through the bare branches set my nerves on edge. The stories my grandfather told me echoed in my mind, blending with the sounds of the forest until I couldn't tell where memory ended and reality began. As we approached our usual spot overlooking the river, the unease I'd felt earlier intensified. The area looked different in the moonlight, the snow casting strange shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. "River, you okay?" Ian's voice snapped me back to the present. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "Just cold. Let's get that fire started." As the others gathered wood, I knelt down to prepare the fire pit, brushing away snow and arranging stones. The moment my knees touched the ground, a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The fire struggled to life, casting flickering shadows across the snow. My friends huddled close, passing around a bottle of cheap whiskey to ward off the cold. Their laughter and chatter seemed oddly muted, as if the woods were swallowing the sound. I sat slightly apart, my eyes scanning the darkness beyond our little circle of light. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now, a pressure against my skin that made it hard to breathe. "Hey, Earth to River," Zoe called, waving the bottle at me. "You're being weirder than usual tonight. What's up?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words died in my throat as a sound reached my ears. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crunching through the snow somewhere in the darkness below us. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ian frowned. "Hear what?" But I was already on my feet, peering down towards the frozen beach. The footsteps came again, closer this time, accompanied by a smell that hit me like a physical force, sickly sweet rot overlaid with the stench of decay. "We need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. "Now." My friends exchanged confused looks, but something in my expression must have convinced them. We hurriedly packed up, extinguishing the fire and gathering our things. As we turned to go, a voice drifted up from the darkness. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, a grating, static-filled sound that somehow formed my name. "River." I froze, my grandfather's warnings ringing in my ears. "Don't look, don't respond, just run." "What the hell was that?" Kai asked, his face pale in the moonlight. "Don't ask," I said, grabbing his arm. "Just run." We tore through the woods, branches whipping at our faces as we stumbled through the snow. The voice followed us, sometimes seeming to come from right beside us, other times echoing from far away. "River, look at me. River." My friends were panicking now, their breath coming in ragged gasps as we ran. I could hear it behind us, something large crashing through the underbrush. The stench of decay grew stronger, filling my nostrils and making me gag. "What is it?" Zoe screamed. "What's chasing us?" I couldn't answer. My entire being was focused on escape, on putting as much distance between us and that thing as possible. But with every step, I could feel it gaining on us. Suddenly, Ian stumbled, crying out as he fell face first into the snow. Without thinking, I skidded to a stop, turning back to help him. That's when I saw it. In the moonlight filtering through the trees, I caught a glimpse of something that defied description. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed too long and bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was a patchwork of rot and decay, and its eyes, God, its eyes, were black pits that seemed to swallow all light. For a moment that stretched into eternity, we stared at each other. Then it smiled, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, and reached for me with a hand that ended in wickedly curved claws. "River!" Ian's scream broke the spell. I hauled him to his feet, and we ran faster than I thought possible, the thing's howl of frustration echoing through the woods behind us. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of campus, collapsing in a heap on the snowy ground. For long minutes, nobody spoke. We just lay there, gasping for breath, our minds struggling to process what had just happened. Finally, Zoe broke the silence. What was that thing?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of generations of stories pressing down on me. "Something that shouldn't exist," I said quietly. "Something from the old stories my grandfather used to tell." "Bullshit," Kai said, but his voice trembled. "That had to be, I don't know, some kind of animal. A bear, maybe?" I shook my head. "You saw it. You know that wasn't any animal." We lapsed into silence again, each lost in our own thoughts. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving us shaky and cold. But none of us wanted to be the first to stand up, to acknowledge that we had to move on from this moment and somehow return to our normal lives. "What do we do now?" Ian asked, his voice small and frightened. I took a deep breath, feeling the mantle of responsibility settling on my shoulders. "We go back to our rooms, we try to sleep, and tomorrow we figure out what to do next." But as we slowly made our way back to the dorms, I knew sleep would be impossible. The image of that thing was burned into my mind, and I knew with a bone-deep certainty that this was far from over. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing's face, its mouth stretched in an impossible grin. The stench of decay seemed to linger in my nostrils, making me gag even in the safety of my dorm room. Ian tossed and turned in his bed across the room, occasionally muttering in his sleep. I envied him his ability to lose consciousness, even if it was fitful. For me, the night stretched on endlessly, my mind racing with questions and fears. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, I made a decision. I needed answers, and I knew there was only one person who could provide them. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Grandfather," I said when he answered, my voice cracking, "I need your help." The next evening found me sitting in my grandfather's small cabin on the outskirts of the Penobscot Reservation. The familiar scent of sage and sweetgrass filled the air, a stark contrast to the rotting smell that still haunted my memories. My grandfather listened silently as I recounted the events of the previous night, his weathered face grave. When I finished, he sighed heavily and reached for his pipe. "I had hoped you would never have to face this, River," he said, his voice low and filled with sorrow. "But the old ways have a habit of finding us whether we seek them out or not." "What was that thing, Grandfather?" I asked, dreading the answer. He puffed on his pipe, the smoke curling around us like mist. "Our people have many names for it: Wendigo, Chenu, Giwakwa. But names have power, and to speak them is to invite attention." He leaned forward, his dark eyes boring into mine. "What you encountered was a manifestation of hunger, greed, and isolation. It is born from the darkest parts of the human spirit, a corruption of everything we hold sacred." I shuddered, remembering the creature's grotesque form. "How do we stop it?" My grandfather shook his head. "It's not about stopping it, River. It's about understanding it, and understanding ourselves. The Wendigo thrives on fear and isolation. It seeks to separate us from our community, our traditions, our very humanity." He reached out and grasped my hand. "You carry the strength of our ancestors within you, River. Trust in that strength. Remember who you are and where you come from. That is your protection against the darkness." As I left his cabin that night, my mind was buzzing with ancient stories and warnings, but beneath the fear I felt a spark of something else: determination. I knew what I had to do. The next few days passed in a blur of research and preparation. I delved into old texts, spoke with elders, and gathered supplies. My friends watched me with a mixture of concern and curiosity, but I kept them at arm's length. This was my burden to bear. When the night of the new moon arrived, I made my way back to the spot by the sandy river, alone this time, armed with nothing but knowledge and the strength of my heritage. The woods were eerily silent as I set up a small fire. The flames danced in the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me with grasping fingers. I took a deep breath and began to sing. The words of the ancient song felt strange on my tongue at first, but as I continued, they flowed more easily. It was a song of protection, of connection to the land and my ancestors. The wind picked up, carrying with it the now familiar stench of decay. I kept singing, my voice growing stronger as I felt the presence approaching. It emerged from the shadows, just as terrifying as I remembered. But this time, I didn't run. I stood my ground, continuing the song even as my heart pounded in my chest. The creature hesitated, its twisted form seeming to flicker in the firelight. For a moment I thought I saw something human in its eyes, a flicker of pain, of loneliness. "I see you," I said, my voice steady. "I understand what you are, what you represent, but you have no power over me." It lunged forward with a howl of rage, but stopped short as if hitting an invisible barrier. The air around us seemed to vibrate with energy. "Go back to the shadows," I commanded. "This is not your place." For a long moment we stood facing each other, locked in a battle of wills. Then, slowly, the creature began to fade. Its form became indistinct, melting into the darkness until only its eyes remained, glowing with an otherworldly light. And then it was gone. I collapsed to my knees, exhausted but triumphant. The woods around me seemed to exhale, the natural sounds of the night returning. As I made my way back to campus, I felt changed. The experience had connected me to my heritage in a way I'd never felt before. I understood now why my grandfather had been so insistent on passing down the old stories. They weren't just tales to frighten children. They were warnings, yes, but also reminders of our strength, our connection to the land and to each other. I knew the Wendigo might return one day. Such creatures never truly die. But I was ready now. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. As I reached the edge of campus, I saw my friends waiting for me. They rushed forward, embracing me with worry and relief evident on their faces. "Where have you been?" Ian demanded. "We've been worried sick." I looked at each of them in turn, seeing the genuine concern in their eyes. In that moment, I made a decision. "I have a story to tell you," I said. "It's not an easy one to hear, but I think it's time you knew." As we walked back to the dorms, I began to speak, sharing the knowledge that had been passed down to me. Because in the end, that's how we keep the darkness at bay, by sharing our stories, our strength, our humanity. The Wendigo thrives on isolation, but it cannot stand against the power of community and tradition. And as long as we remember that, we will always find our way back to the light. In 2019, I was 20 years old, in my final semester of college. I was attending a university in the southeastern part of South Dakota, a stark contrast to my upbringing in the greater St. Louis area in Missouri. The move from my hometown to college was a significant change, 8 hours away from everything familiar, thrust into a new environment with different landscapes, weather patterns, and most importantly, people. During my time in South Dakota, I had the privilege of meeting many individuals from diverse backgrounds and cultures. Among the most intriguing were the Native Americans from the Sioux tribe. Their rich heritage and deep connection to the land fascinated me. We would often gather in the common areas of our dorm or in local coffee shops, and they would share stories about their culture's mythologies. The tales of the Thunderbird and Sasquatch particularly captured my attention. As they spoke, I could almost see these legendary creatures in my mind's eye. The majestic Thunderbird soaring through storm clouds, its wings creating peals of thunder, and the elusive Sasquatch, a gentle giant hidden in the depths of forests. These stories stirred memories of my childhood obsession with cryptids. As a kid, I would spend hours poring over books about mysterious creatures, my imagination running wild with possibilities. I was a devoted fan of shows like Monster Quest and Mountain Monsters, eagerly anticipating each new episode and the potential evidence they might uncover. I'd beg my parents to let me stay up late to watch these shows, promising to do extra chores in exchange for the privilege. However, as I grew older, my perspective began to shift. The magic of those childhood beliefs started to fade, replaced by a more skeptical worldview. By the time I reached college, I had largely disregarded my past fascination with cryptids. When my Sioux classmates would share their cultural stories, my interest was more rooted in intellectual curiosity than genuine belief. I approached these conversations with respect for their traditions, but internally, I viewed them through a lens of anthropological interest, rather than considering the possibility that these beings might actually exist. It was a way for me to learn about their culture and history, to understand their worldview, even if I didn't share their beliefs. Despite my skepticism, some of their stories would find their way into my subconscious, manifesting in vivid and often unsettling nightmares. The tales that affected me most were those about shapeshifters, beings with the uncanny ability to mimic your friends and family. The idea that someone or something could perfectly imitate a loved one, potentially replacing them without your knowledge, struck a deep chord of fear within me. These dreams would often leave me waking up in a cold sweat, heart racing, as I tried to shake off the lingering fear and remind myself that it was just a story, just a dream. The thought of not being able to trust your own senses, of doubting the identity of those closest to you, It was enough to make anyone terrified, in my opinion. In the middle of my final semester, my personal life took a significant hit. My girlfriend, my first real relationship, broke up with me. The pain of this separation was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Growing up, I'd always been surrounded by family and friends, never truly alone. Now, faced with the prospect of navigating life without a partner, I felt lost and overwhelmed. The breakup began to affect every aspect of my life. My mental health took a nosedive, and my schoolwork suffered as a result. I found it hard to concentrate in class, my mind constantly drifting back to memories of happier times with my ex. Even simple tasks like getting out of bed or attending meals became monumental challenges. My two friends and roommates, Sean and Tyler, noticed the change in my behavior almost immediately. At first, they gave me some space, assuming I needed time to process my emotions. But as days turned into weeks, their concern grew. They would knock on my door, inviting me to join them for meals or study sessions, but I often declined, preferring to wallow in my misery. One night, around 10 p.m., I was in my usual spot, sprawled on my bed, mindlessly watching television. I had a can of Bang energy drink in my hand, the Star Blast flavor, my go-to choice for late-night study sessions, or in this case, late-night sulking. The artificial sweetness of the drink was a poor substitute for the comfort I was seeking, but it was something to focus on other than my thoughts. Suddenly, a loud knock on my door startled me so badly that I jolted, spilling the bright blue liquid onto the carpet. Before I could even respond, Sean burst through the door, his tall frame filling the doorway. His face bore a wide grin, a stark contrast to the gloom that had settled over me in recent weeks. "Come on, bro, we're going hunting," Sean exclaimed, his enthusiasm filling the room. I stared at him blankly for a moment, trying to process his words. Hunting? At this hour? It seemed absurd, but then again, everything had seemed a bit absurd to me lately. Sean was a character, to say the least. A self-described ladies' man from the West Coast, he stood at an impressive 6'5". His build resembled that of a former offensive lineman, which made sense given our shared background in football. In fact, that's how we all met. Sean, Tyler, and I were all former offensive linemen who came to play for the school we were currently attending. My own football career had come to an abrupt end the year prior due to an injury. After careful consideration and discussions with my coaches and family, I decided to call it quits. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one for my long-term health and well-being. Sean and Tyler had also quit the team, each for their own personal reasons that I won't delve into here. Despite no longer being teammates on the field, our bond had grown stronger off it. Over the years, Sean and I had transitioned from reluctant teammates to close friends. Our relationship was built on a foundation of shared experiences, late-night study sessions, and the kind of camaraderie that comes from pushing through grueling football practices together. Tyler was closer to Sean than to me, but we got along well. He was the country boy of our trio, hailing from Nebraska. Tyler stood at about my height, 6'2", but outweighed me significantly at 285 pounds of pure muscle. He was the epitome of a good old boy. You'd be hard-pressed to catch him without a wad of chewing tobacco in his mouth or a cheap beer in his hand. His drawl and his penchant for cowboy boots and flannel shirts made him stand out on our diverse campus. I knew Tyler had gone hunting with Sean before. They would often return from their expeditions with tales of their adventures, sometimes bringing back game that Tyler would insist on cooking for us. However, I had never been the hunting type. The thought of tracking and killing animals had never appealed to me, and I'd always politely declined their invitations in the past. Lately, though, I'd been too busy sulking in my room to even muster up the courage to ask if I could tag along on one of their outings. Part of me had started to wonder if maybe getting out and trying something new might help shake me out of my funk. I looked up at Sean, my voice lacking enthusiasm as I replied, "I don't know, man. Think I'm just going to take it easy." Sean's grin faltered for a moment, replaced by a look of concern and determination. He stepped further into the room, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Justin, listen," he began. "I'm sorry about your breakup, I really am. But you gotta stop feeling sorry for yourself. It's time to get back out there again." He paused, then added with a hint of his usual cheerfulness, "Come on, dude, just go out with us. It'll be good for you." Sean's words bounced around my mind for a few moments. I knew he was right. I couldn't keep hiding away in my room forever. My gaze dropped to the energy drink-stained floor, watching as the blue liquid slowly seeped into the carpet fibers. In that moment, I realized that if I said no, I would only torture myself for the rest of the night, probably ending up eating cheap gas station pizza and staring at my ex's social media posts. With a deep breath, I looked back up at Sean. "Screw it," I said, surprising myself with the hint of determination in my voice. "Let's go." Sean's face lit up with a triumphant grin. He clapped me on the shoulder, nearly knocking me over in his excitement. "That's what I'm talking about," he exclaimed. "Get your stuff, we're rolling out in 5. As I scrambled to find suitable clothes for a night out hunting, I could hear Sean in the hallway loudly announcing to Tyler that he'd managed to drag the hermit out of his cave. Under normal circumstances, I might have been annoyed by the comment, but at that moment, I was just grateful for friends who cared enough to pull me out of my self-imposed isolation. 5 minutes later, we were heading out the front door of our apartment. Sean made a show of locking the door, jokingly asking if I remembered what the outside world looked like. I managed a weak chuckle in response, already feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation about the night ahead. As we approached Tyler's truck, I could see him already sitting in the driver's seat, engine running and country music playing softly from the speakers. When he spotted us walking towards him, his eyes widened in surprise. "Oh my God, he's alive!" Tyler called out, his voice a mixture of genuine shock and playful teasing. Sean chuckled at Tyler's reaction, and I forced a smile. "Haha, very funny, Tyler," I replied, trying to inject some humor into my voice despite the nervousness I felt. Sean jumped into the passenger seat of the truck, leaving me to climb into the back. As I settled in, I noticed a nearly full 30-pack of cheap beer next to me. Tyler caught my eye in the rearview mirror and grinned. "Grab me one, would you?" he asked, already pulling out onto the road. I hesitated for a moment, my responsible side kicking in. Drinking and driving, even on back roads, wasn't exactly safe. But the rebellious part of me, the part that was desperate to feel something other than the dull ache of heartbreak, won out. I reached for a can and passed it forward to Tyler. For the next 2 hours, we drove around the back roads of South Dakota, our journey punctuated by the occasional sip of beer and bursts of laughter, as Sean and Tyler shared stories from their previous hunting trips. The landscape outside the window seemed to go on forever, endless plains covered in darkness, broken only by the occasional cluster of trees or abandoned farm building. The only light for miles came from the headlights of Tyler's truck, cutting through the darkness like a knife. As we bounced along dirt trails that seemed to have no end, I found myself relaxing for the first time in weeks. The familiar banter between Sean and Tyler, the rumble of the truck's engine, and the vast openness of the South Dakota night sky all combined to create a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since the breakup. At one point along the way, the truck came to a sudden stop. Before I could ask what was happening, Sean and Tyler were out of the vehicle at breakneck speed. Confused but not wanting to be left behind, I scrambled to follow them. Suddenly, there was a loud bang that echoed through the night, causing me to flinch. Several moments passed in tense silence before Tyler walked over to the side of the road. He bent over, picked something up by the tail, and turned back to us with a cheesy grin plastered across his face. In his hand dangled the limp form of a raccoon he'd just shot. "Dinner's served, boys," Tyler announced proudly, holding up his prize. Sean whooped in celebration while I stood there, a mix of shock and awe coursing through me. It was my first time witnessing a hunt up close, and I wasn't quite sure how to feel about it. This scene repeated itself a couple more times over the next hour. Each time Tyler would spot some small game, bring the truck to a halt, and take his shot. Sometimes he hit his mark, sometimes he missed, but he always maintained that same enthusiastic energy. As the night wore on and we consumed more beer, the need for a bathroom break became increasingly urgent. Tyler, ever observant, looked at Sean and me with a knowing smirk. "Either you boys need to go pee?" he asked, his tone reminiscent of an elementary school teacher addressing his class. Sean and I exchanged glances before simultaneously raising our hands, playing along with Tyler's teacher act. Tyler rolled his eyes good-naturedly, then began to slow his truck down to a stop in the middle of the dirt road we were on. As the truck came to a halt, I took in our surroundings. On the right side of the truck, there were about 20 yards of grass, then dozens of trees beyond it, their branches reaching into the night sky like gnarled fingers. The darkness between the trees was so thick it seemed almost tangible. On the left side of the truck, the Great Plains continued, an endless sea of grass disappearing into the horizon. We all got out of the truck to relieve ourselves. Given the complete lack of other humans for miles around, we didn't bother seeking privacy, instead staying on the dirt road next to the idling truck. The sound of the engine provided a constant background noise, somehow making the vast emptiness around us feel a little less overwhelming. As I finished up and zipped my pants, I turned my gaze toward the tree line, more out of habit than any real interest. What I saw next made my blood run cold. There in the darkness between the trees were two glowing yellow orbs. They were about 20 yards away and approximately 20 or 25 feet up off the ground. At first I thought the beer had finally caught up with me, playing tricks on my vision. I rubbed my eyes vigorously, hoping the apparition would disappear when I opened them again. But when I looked back, the yellow orbs were still there, unmoving, seeming to stare right at me. A chill ran down my spine as I realized these weren't just random lights. They were eyes. Something was watching us from the trees. My first thought was that it must be another raccoon, or perhaps an owl. Trying to keep my voice steady, I called out to Tyler. "Hey Tyler, come over here for a sec," I said, my eyes never leaving the glowing orbs in the trees. Tyler ambled over, a quizzical look on his face. "What's up, man?" he asked. I pointed towards the tree line, my finger shaking slightly. "Do you see that? Those two yellow things in the tree? I think it might be another raccoon or something." Tyler squinted in the direction I was pointing, then looked back at me with a confused expression. He shook his head slowly. "Bro, you should get your eyes checked. There's nothing over there." Startled by his response, I whipped my head back towards the trees. To my shock, Tyler was right. The yellow orbs were gone. The tree line was just a wall of darkness once again. A wave of relief washed over me, mixed with a twinge of embarrassment. It must have been the booze after all, I thought to myself. Shrugging it off, I turned around to walk back to the truck, ready to call it a night and head home. As I turned, however, I heard a sudden movement from the trees where I had just been looking. Before I could even process what was happening, an earth-shaking boom resonated through the air, as if something massive had fallen from a great height. The sound froze me in my tracks. Slowly, feeling as though I was moving through molasses, I turned back to face the tree line once more. What I saw then would be forever etched into my memory. Those same yellow orbs I had seen before were back, but they were no longer high up in the trees. Now they were only about 8 to 9 feet off the ground, and they seemed closer. I strained my eyes, desperately trying to make out more details in the inky blackness surrounding those glowing eyes. But it was futile. Beyond those terrifying yellow orbs, there was nothing but impenetrable darkness. In that moment, I found myself utterly paralyzed with fear. I'd seen countless movies and TV shows where characters freeze up in the face of danger, but I never truly understood what that meant until then. The terror that gripped me was all-consuming, robbing me of my ability to move, to think, to do anything but stand there and stare at those haunting yellow eyes. I had to consciously remind myself to breathe, each intake of air feeling like a monumental effort. I could hear my own heartbeat, its rhythm increasing rapidly as the seconds ticked by. The urge to look back, to check on Sean and Tyler was almost overwhelming, but the fear that turning away from this creature would cause it to rush towards me kept me rooted in place, my gaze locked on those glowing orbs. Just as I thought I might be losing my mind, I felt a hand on my shoulder. The sudden contact nearly caused me to jump out of my skin. It was Tyler, his voice low and urgent as he spoke. "We need to make a dash to the truck," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If not, we're gonna die," Tyler added, his voice barely above a whisper. I managed to nod my head slightly, my eyes still fixed on those terrifying yellow orbs in the darkness. "Count of 3, Tyler said, his hand tightening on my shoulder. 1, 2. Tyler never got to 3. As soon as he said 2, we heard the most horrifying sound I could have ever imagined emanating from the figure cloaked in darkness. It was a roar, but unlike anything I'd ever heard before. The sound seemed to embody pure hatred, evil, and danger, all rolled into one bone-chilling noise. The roar was paradoxical in nature, high-pitched yet somehow deep at the same time. It reverberated through my entire body, shaking me to my core. Whatever was making this noise had to have impossibly large lungs. The sheer volume and duration of the sound defied everything I knew about animal vocalizations. In that instant, feeling and logic shocked back into my body. The paralysis that had gripped me shattered, replaced by an overwhelming urge to flee. Without a word, Tyler and I turned and ran towards the truck. As we sprinted, I could see Sean frantically struggling with the front passenger side door. After what felt like an eternity, he managed to wrench it open and dive inside. Sean, bless him, had the presence of mind to reach over and open the rear passenger side door for us. As I ran, pumping my legs harder than I ever had in my life, I became acutely aware of the sounds behind me. Heavy breathing, not my own or Tyler's, filled the air, accompanied by the thunderous footfalls of something large giving chase. Terror gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I pushed myself to run faster, my lungs burning with the effort. As I neared the truck, I realized I might not have time to climb in normally. In a move born of desperation, I launched myself forward, essentially diving into the back of the truck. I landed hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me, but I didn't care. I was in the truck, and that was all that mattered. Tyler jumped into the driver's seat almost simultaneously, immediately throwing the truck into gear and slamming his foot on the gas pedal. The tires spun for a moment, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel before finding purchase. The truck lurched forward with such force that I was thrown back against the seat. As we sped away, I found the courage to look back through the rear window. Through the dust cloud kicked up by our hasty departure, all I could see were those two glowing yellow eyes. They seemed to bore into me, filled with an intelligence and malevolence that chilled me to my very soul. Then, as quickly as it had all started, the eyes disappeared into the darkness as we sped back towards our apartment. The drive back was a blur of adrenaline and fear. None of us spoke. The only sounds were our heavy breathing and the roar of the engine as Tyler pushed the truck to its limits. It wasn't until we pulled into our driveway that the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. We piled out of the truck as quickly as our shaking legs would allow. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling so badly that it took several attempts to get the key into the lock. When I finally managed to open the front door, we all nearly fell into the living room in our haste to get inside and shut the world out. For several long moments we just stood there in the entryway, looking at each other with wide, shocked eyes. It was Sean who finally broke the silence. What the hell was that?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. Neither Tyler nor I had an answer for him. Instead, Tyler moved towards the kitchen, his movements mechanical. "I need a drink," he muttered. "A real one." As Tyler rummaged through the cabinets, Sean collapsed onto the couch, running his hands through his hair repeatedly. I remained standing, my body still thrumming with residual adrenaline. A few minutes later, we were all seated in the living room, clutching mugs of strong coffee that Sean had made. The familiar aroma and warmth of the beverage helped to ground us, bringing a small sense of normalcy to the surreal situation. Slowly, hesitantly, we began to share our respective accounts of what we'd experienced. Sean, it turned out, had only heard the roar. He'd been facing the other way, focused on getting the truck door open, when the sound had nearly stopped his heart. As I recounted my side of the story, the glowing eyes, the feeling of being watched, the bone-shaking roar, Sean's expression grew increasingly puzzled, but when I finished, Tyler spoke up, corroborating my account. He described seeing the same yellow orbs, hearing the crash as something fell from the tree, and feeling the overwhelming sense of danger that had prompted our flight. We talked late into the night, trying to make sense of what we'd encountered, but the more we discussed it, the less sense it seemed to make. Eventually, exhaustion overtook us. The adrenaline crash, combined with the lateness of the hour and the emotional toll of our experience, left us all drained. As we prepared to turn in for the night, Tyler paused at the hallway leading to our bedrooms. "Whatever that thing was," he said quietly, "we're lucky to be alive." Sean and I nodded silently, the gravity of Tyler's words sinking in. With mumbled goodnights, we retreated to our respective rooms. Sleep, however, was elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing yellow orbs staring back at me. In the morning, I woke up with a slight headache, my mouth dry and my body aching as if I'd run a marathon. For a blissful moment, I thought perhaps it had all been a bizarre dream, but as I walked into the kitchen and saw Tyler already there, eating breakfast with a haunted look in his eyes, I knew it had been all too real. I grabbed a protein bar from the pantry and began to chew mechanically, joining Tyler at the table. We ate in silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I looked at Tyler and asked the question that had been burning in my mind since we'd returned home. "Tyler," I said, my voice slightly hoarse, "what the heck was that?" Tyler stopped eating and looked at me. His expression was one of a man who had seen things that defied explanation, things that challenged his understanding of the world. "Well," he said slowly, "I don't know. All I know is it wasn't human, and it wasn't like anything I've ever hunted." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Whatever we had encountered out there in the South Dakota night was something beyond our understanding, something that perhaps shouldn't exist in our rational, modern world. That encounter marked the end of my college days. After graduation, I moved back to the St. Louis area, eager to put some distance between myself and the memories of that night. Over the years, I lost touch with Tyler and Sean. Last I heard, Sean had returned to the West Coast while Tyler had gone back to Nebraska. Our shared experience, too strange and frightening to easily discuss, had created a rift between us that proved difficult to bridge. I'm now 25, engaged, and have a pretty nice job in law enforcement. Most days are good, filled with the normal routines and challenges of adult life. But every now and then, especially when I'm driving at night alone, my mind drifts back to that encounter all those years ago. In those moments, I find myself gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, my eyes scanning the darkness beyond the headlights for any sign of those haunting yellow orbs. In the years since that night, I found myself drawn back to the research on cryptids that had fascinated me as a child. I've pored over accounts of strange creatures and unexplained phenomena, searching for anything that might explain what we encountered. The best I can narrow it down to is either a Bigfoot or possibly a skinwalker. But even these explanations feel inadequate in the face of what we experienced. Regardless of what it was, those eyes remain seared into my memory. They've become a part of me, a reminder of a world beyond our understanding, a world where the impossible becomes terrifyingly real. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of that unearthly roar ringing in my ears. To this day, I thank my lucky stars that we got away alive. And to whatever creature is out there in the wilds of South Dakota, I can only say this: let's not meet again.